Good evening, my fellow Americans. I think we did it right today. Welcome to the stream. I'm Samuel Ronan, your future president. And today we are going to cover quite a few things, specifically regarding the nomination process. I'm gonna do a bit of a spoiler right up front. We are not, in fact, going to be able to nominate ourselves, but we're gonna go into the reasons why, and exactly how disingenuous that is for the Democratic Party to create a very undemocratic nomination process. Um, Wait a minute, I changed that stream info. I guess it didn't update. Oh well. We're going to be discussing the Bangladeshi riots because those are now increasing. We're going to talk about the Democratic Convention, of course, and we're going to talk about Kamala and her actual record and why she is not a good candidate. And the greater reason why it should be significantly more open than what it is. Hello, Asmarius. Hello, Oshun. Yeah. What else was that? Was it? So, without further ado, you are very welcome. What's happening in Bangladesh is going to more than likely start happening here in America, and the response is going to be the same. So, page 18. So, this is the official call for the DNC convention issued by the Democratic Party. Jamie Harrison, the chair, adopted by the committee on September 10th, 2022. Table of contents, right? This is all the stuff. How to delegate votes, which... the fact that there's an equation... There's a friggin' equation for the delegates. The delegates select everything throughout all of this. And it's this... It has to be... The fact that it has to be defined... Allocation factor, democratic vote, electoral vote, total vote. Like, that's insane, first of all. But there's other things like qualifications for the delegations, selection deadline, certification requirements. Now, that's where some of it gets a little interesting. The requirements, right? Pledged delegates and alternates. Each state's Democratic chair shall certify in writing to the Secretary of the DNC the election of their state's delegates and alternates to the DNC 10 days prior, or 10 days after their election. For the purposes of this call, the chair of a committee constituted pursuant of the thing shall be recognized to act in place. So the other thing is this is written very, very, very legalese. Very legalese. The layman would not understand this, and I can say that with absolute certainty because I am a layman and I don't understand most of this. But the long and short of it is, there's the process for delegations, the selection, and then the order of what happens next. 10 days after the completion of the delegate, the chair will certify in writing the Secretary of DNC, the delegates, and then the replacements. Automatic delegates, which are the rebranded superdelegates. Delegation chair, convention pages, stuff and things, right? But what really matters out of this whole thing, the thing that really grinds my gears here, is nomination of the Democratic candidate for president. The permanent chair shall receive nominations from the floor for the Democratic candidate for the office of President of the United States in the following manner. Requests to nominate a candidate shall be in writing and shall have affixed thereto the written approval of the proposed nominee. That's fine, right? And everything's got to be done by 6 p.m. of the 27th. Right? Each such request must be accompanied by a petition indicating support for the proposed nominee signed by delegates representing not less than 300 or more than 600 delegate votes. That's fine. Not more than 50 of which may come from one delegation. And this is the part that is the problem. A delegate may not sign more than one nominating petition for president and for vice president. Pledged and automatic delegates may sign the petition. Meaning, delegates can only pick one candidate, which means no open primary, which means if Kamala has the supermajority, that's it, that's that. Those same delegates cannot go and sign mine, for instance. Unlike when I ran for DNC chair, any delegate could sign anybody's petition because that's called democracy. And the fact that this isn't happening here is astonishing. Actually, it's not astonishing or surprising, really. It's appalling. Then it goes into the order of the precedents. Shall be allowed 20 minutes for the presentation of their name. Delegates and alternates shall maintain order. Roll call. The first ballot. And then beyond the first ballot, that's when the superdelegates can get involved. The other thing, though, at the very bottom here, is that the petition itself needs to be notarized. Like, actually notarized. And we could do a quick Google search, but I am fairly certain notary on call. I don't think that's a thing. I literally don't think that's a thing. Maybe it is. eNotary On Call is an online notarization platform that offers document notarization worldwide for verified notary. Okay, so maybe it does. Okay. Still, that costs money. I will save that link, though. So, $25 to get a signature just to nominate yourself or be nominated. The second part is each of the delegates must also be notarized, and you need at least 300. So it's 300 times 25? Actually, math. $7,500. So in order to become nominated in the Democratic Party, you got to spend $25 just to get on it, and then per individual sign up with this deal here, this online, is another $25 times 300 minimum. So $7,500, $25. That's how much it costs to become a presidential nominee. Now, I get what you're saying. I know what some of you might be thinking. It's, well, yeah, you should have to spend a lot more money to be president. Not everybody should be running for president. Not everybody's qualified, blah, 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 blah. But the problem here is that the delegates cannot vote for more than one candidate, and there is a prohibitive cost involved for most people, which, for the party of the working class, is antithetical to the actual working class. Who has $7,500 lying around? Go ahead, show hands. Show hands, anybody. Whether you're watching right now or in the future, go ahead and raise your right hand if you have $7,500 to just for a chance of being nominated. You don't. Nobody does. Nobody can gamble with $7,500 like that. Not if you actually have a job. Not if you're actually living paycheck to paycheck. And not only that, how disingenuous is it that the selection process is, again, limited? One delegate, one vote. Sure, for the actual vote. But one delegate, one nomination signature? That's insane. Secondly, why isn't it a primary? Why isn't it, and I get it, a primary might be a bit much, and the delegate might be a solution to that particular problem. But why is it so exclusive? Why is it so exclusionary? That's not the way the Democratic Party should be. Now, I don't know the RNC's position. It's probably similar, to be fair. It's probably similar. But it's the fact of the matter, right? It's the principle of the thing. $7,500 to get nominated, or to file a nomination petition. That's pretty ridiculous, if you ask me. So that's unfortunate. I don't have $7,500. Like, I legitimately don't have that money. I had falsely assumed, naively assumed perhaps, that there would be some sort of open-endedness to it, but no. It's one delegate, one nomination petition, $7,500 to even throw it in there. And of course, when Kamala inherited $80 million, what's $7,500 to her? It's a drop in the hat. In fact, she said she has 3,000, so like 3,120, I think, times 25. $78,000. That's not even going to the party. That's $78,000 going to notaries so that the party can verify them. That's that's more than most people make in a year. The median salary in America, 48,060. That is literally 30. That is 30,000. That's almost six. That's actually more than 30%. 4860 divided by 78,000. That is 61%. 61% is what most, or the median income in America of what it would cost just to get the nomination petition. And somehow the Democrats are the party of the working class. If that isn't elitist, I don't know what is. I really don't. Hey, you must spend $78,000 just to be nominated as a potential president. Or to even have like the super nomination or whatever. Just, that's insane. And of course, good luck trying to find this document. I had help from people to find this document, so thank you to everyone who helped me with that. And yeah, it's not readily accessible, whereas Project 2025, there's a whole curriculum, there's notes, there's documents, there's literature that you're supposed to follow up on. Democrats are like, get fucked, nerds, and also good luck trying to find the documentation. It takes me 2.5 months to make over $7 grand. Is that take-home pay? Is that after all your bills are paid? Who can actually save $7,000 in a year? That's a lot of money for most people. That's insane. This whole process is insane. So I am the future president. Don't get me wrong. But it will probably not be 2024. So, in fact, I should probably update that. Ronan 2024? Not likely. Not unless something ridiculous happens. So, all that to say, that is the reason why we cannot play the game this time around. I don't have 7,500 to spare. We can still try the write-in campaign, yeah, but the thing is, with write-in candidacy, it's still a process. Like, I don't know if people realize that, but what is the process to be a write-in candidate for president in the USA? So, and I know this is gonna really burst a lot of bubbles, because I saw this conversation happen on the internet already. You may decide to write in the name of a candidate who is not listed on your ballot. Learn where to get information how and when they count. But writing in a name does not mean the vote will count. Many states require that write-in candidates file paperwork before the election. Otherwise, the state will not count the person's votes. Check with your state's election office to find out the rules for your state. So, I don't know. Let's try Alabama for the sake of argument. Oh, it just takes you to the Secretary of State. Write-in. Wow, could I fail any harder with typing? Why is this? Okay. A registered voter. Okay. That didn't say anything about write-in. Whatever. You get the idea. Well, I don't know. I can't just go back. You can't just click back on this thing, unfortunately. Point being, it's a process for most states. And, unfortunately, that means write-in campaigns are not as free and democratic as people think. Just write them in. Just write in Hammurabi. Right? Well, that vote doesn't count. And not just because he's an ape and dead, but because it literally wouldn't count because there was no paperwork filed. So with that being said, let's, I guess, move right along because That's all there. That's it. Then that's it. Let's do Kamala Harris first. Let's just bag on the Democrats for now. And then we'll get into some of the heavier information, such as the Bangla riots and
the capital of England, presented in the most iconic post-apocalyptic.
Never in a million years I would have thought that they were going to charge me for Sell's murder. I never talked to no detective, no police officer, no DA, nobody.
Just arrested and then charged.
Arrested and charged, that's it.
Was the first time you saw Kamala Harris in person the day that the verdict was issued?
That is
showed
true.
up at the two most pivotal.
And honestly, if you could just write, well, yeah, that kind of becomes more of a homework assignment. In your process for finding out what paperwork, right, you might want to just create a spreadsheet that has all the states and their write-in requirements and then links to the documentation, just so we have it, because we're going to want it in the future regardless.
Times in this first trial and me being convicted and me being sentenced, she wanted to be present for a celebration of a conviction.
That's what it felt like, celebration?
A celebration, that's what it felt like. The reactions I get when I tell people my story is, they say it's the worst nightmare. You know, it's the closest thing to dying.
Jamal, I'm going to read you a quote real quick. The job of a progressive prosecutor is to look out for those overlooked, to speak up for those whose voices aren't being heard, to see and address the causes of crime, not just their consequences, and to shine a light on the inequality and unfairness that lead to injustice. It is to recognize that not everyone needs punishment, that what many need, quite obviously, is help. Kamala Harris wrote that in her book, The Truths We Hold. Does that sound consistent with the kind of with the brand of justice that you saw administered by offices that she was running?
It definitely sounds like Kamala Harris right now as a senator, but at the time of her being the head district attorney of San Francisco, that is almost polar opposite of what I felt and what our community felt in San Francisco.
So Jamal, where are we?
Right now we are in Sunnydale Projects, where I was born and raised at. Now, this isn't a place that you'll want to bring outsiders into, and a place that they don't want to go. This ain't a place that feels comfortable. It feels like you might get robbed, you might get shot.
The police were keeping files on you, and your brothers, and other people who were...
That right there. Police are just keeping files and tabs on just random black people in impoverished neighborhoods, and that's somehow okay, so that when some inevitable crime happens because of lack of resources for that community, we can just go through a list, throw a dart at it, and be like, yep, this person's guilty. That's fucked up. I mean, don't get me wrong. Every time we see the injustices of cops and prosecutors, it just makes me want to point to my campaign website and be like, look, this is why we're going to throw it all out and start over fresh from the ground up and literally listen to the people impacted when designing a policing or criminal justice system, because clearly, oh no, it's just a baguette. But clearly, what we currently got ain't it.
Living in Sunnydale from a very young age.
They already had me labeled, because I'm in this community, as a potential gang member, potential killer.
So they're profiling people on being potentially a problem based on being black and poor. I mean, I think profiling is illegal, but maybe it's not. So we gotta add, destroy all profiling records that target impoverished communities as potential criminal. Like, honestly, By the time we're running for president full steam, I swear to God, the police reforms page is probably going to be 922 pages long just for all the shit that happens in this country with regards to profiling, discrimination, injustice, abuse of power, etc.
A potential drug dealer. You gotta wake up to the fact that, you know, things are set up against us.
There is a conspiracy.
Literally.
Yes.
It happened to you.
Exactly. There
It's
is
proven in court.
Absolutely. Places like this have been developed for predominantly African American people to not be able to succeed beyond it.
Yeah.
That's exactly
What did you know
true.
about Kamala Harris? What did you know about San Francisco having a black DA?
Nobody in the hood ever worried or focused on the DA position in general, but people did focus on it just a tad bit, that it was black, and feeling like, okay, this black lady in office, Kamala Harris, she was gonna understand where we come from, you know, and have more of a sympathetic way of prosecuting people that come from our communities who have been plagued with no opportunities.
Literally, no opportunities and no resources.
This is Hunter's.
This is why I specifically, when I campaign, try to go to poor communities, communities that are often underrepresented, instead of just going to middle class or rich neighborhoods. Because if I'm going to represent my countrymen, then I need to represent all of my countrymen. And the ones that need my representation the most are the ones who have the least. And I'm not saying that to garner some fake support or internet credibility. This is what I did when I ran for state representative. I went to the trailer parks, and I went to, well, I did go to trailer parks, and then there were some poorer communities besides in Warren County. I went there specifically. And then when I went there first, then I went door knocking into the other suburban areas. And the same is true when I was going for Congress. I went to the seedier parts of Cincinnati because that's where the representation is needed. That's where people are needed the most. And it kills me because it's not like we don't have the resources for it. If we can make every single cop in America G.I. Joe, surely we can help poor communities that like projects or really downtrodden trailer parks. Okay, because this is insane. It's absolutely insane. And the majority of us poor. Yeah, the majority of us, the median income is $48,000 a year. And what do we say? 4860 divided by 2080. That's barely $23 an hour. $23.10. That's the median salary in America. That's not a whole hell of a lot when you need $80,000 a year to survive in most parts of the country.
Point where these different projects and communities used to really war with each other.
Jamal, in July 2007, what's going on in your life at that point?
I had recently just came off of I Love New York, and also that's when my friend Sel Kuka got killed.
More than a year goes by, and no one's been arrested in the case. You hadn't even been questioned.
Haven't even been questioned.
Yep, welcome to the stream. We're watching Kamala Harris's DA record and how she's a scumbag. And then talking about how completely disingenuous our criminal justice system is and how our society literally sets up black people for failure. And then profiles them, targets them, and then charges, indicts, and sentences them just because they fit a description.
No, the police was still, you know, trying to get a conviction by all means necessary. When I was arrested for it, the community knew I didn't do it. And it was here we go again. See, this is why we don't trust, you know, law enforcement, because it gets to a point where somebody who didn't do something goes to jail for it. I don't have no history of crime. What's up, boy? I have a history of being around in the community, but that doesn't mean that I'm a suspect. I'm like, oh man, I'll be out within 72 hours. They're gonna figure this out. They're gonna clear this up.
And then when you found out what the evidence was that they supposedly had you on, there wasn't much there. Can you describe what it was?
They had a woman saying that she seen me kill Sel. The second witness that they had really wasn't a witness at all.
I didn't have a criminal record either, and that didn't stop cops from pointing a gun at me, forcibly arresting me, and then forcing me to deal with the criminal justice system either. Police wield power and authority. They do not protect and serve. There's a distinct difference. They are an institution of oppression. And that is why it must be abolished in its entirety and rebuilt, if at all, in exactly the specific way that it is necessary and nothing else. Not a single millimeter of opportunity given outside of their very strict role in society.
She said anything that the police officers wanted her to say, and they said that her recollection of the events was extremely credible. So that's what ultimately got the arrest warrant.
The District Attorney of San Francisco, Kamala Harris, appeared in the courtroom during your trial twice.
Yeah, the two times that Kamala Harris showed up to my trial was when I got convicted, and also when they laid down the sentencing.
When you saw her on the day that the verdict was handed down, did you take that as a bad sign?
Not only is witness testimony unreliable, it shouldn't be enough to convict for murder. You need a murder weapon. You need motive. You need X, Y, and Z. Didn't he have an alibi? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
It felt to me that she was well aware about my case, and she was there to set her presence, almost take pride in getting a conviction.
After more than 6 months in prison, he successfully appealed his case and was acquitted in a new trial. Probably because he didn't fucking do it, and he probably wasn't anywhere close to where it happened. Wait till you find out about the mother she sent to jail for taking her daughter out of school for chemo. Is that one of the videos you found, Oshun? Because, yeah, we can look that up.
When I put in my appeal, the people that's fighting against my appeal to keep the conviction is the Attorney General office. I learned it reading, you know, their reply to my appeal, and you see Kamala Harris' name at the bottom. And now it's starting to feel a little personal.
When you win the $13.1 million, it's a massive settlement. Did you feel like that was enough?
There's not an amount that could get back those 7 years. That was 6.5 years that I spent in prison. But instead of me coming home feeling like I was a victim, I wanted to prove.
Wait a minute, I thought it just said that he appealed successfully. Oh, after more than 6 years. Did I read months? My apologies. I thought that said months. 6 years in prison, they appealed his case. Holy shit. No, $13 million isn't enough. First of all, she should be in jail for literally, what did they, I mean, they specifically used a phrase here. For being framed. Framing someone for murder, if that isn't a crime, needs to be. Let me just, I don't know, I guess we're going to add it. If DAs, attorneys, police, etc. frame someone for murder, they should be charged, convicted, and sentenced to triple the maximum sentence for the crime being framed for. That's insane. $13 million. 6 years in prison. People don't necessarily survive for 6 years in prison. And being in prison can absolutely change you. That's 6 years of your fucking life. And good luck trying to get a job. I mean, he seems to be doing well for himself, but how many people can actually handle $13 million? Not many. That's disgusting. Her truancy bill, but I don't know if there is a video. I thought it said months also. Yeah, I thought it said, yeah. Insane. Absolutely insane.
Did you feel like that was enough?
There's not an amount that could get back those 7 years. That was 6.5 years that I spent in prison. But instead of me coming home feeling like I was a victim, I wanted to prove that I'm a survivor, and I will not let my story go unheard. You know, I'm not necessarily saying I'm looking for an apology, but some acknowledgement from her that she could have messed up would be, of course, that'd be huge. You could have made some mistakes. You could have missed some things. For me, it was a big miss. You know, I had life in prison. I've met people in prison that was wrongfully convicted.
Jesus.
I want my story to be out to provoke reform ultimately. Beyond that, I want to be able to be who I want to be. I'm an actor, you know, I'm a musician, I'm a father. I'm more than this person that was framed. I'm more than this person that was wrongfully convicted.
Damn. That? So yeah, we got another one coming up, and probably another one after that. If Anna finds, if Oshun finds another video.
Well, if Senator Kamala Harris rises in the early presidential
I think it's pretty safe to say that fuck Kamala Harris, because putting an innocent man in jail for 6.5 years, framing them, and then giving them a $13.1 million settlement because they were framed by the criminal justice system, and not even writing a letter of, oops, my bad. Not even an acknowledgement? What kind of a scummy human being do you have to be like, I literally ruined your life. I took 6 years away of your life. 6 years? I'm 34 years old. 28. That's over half a decade. 6 years of 34. That's nearly 20% of my life. No, 6 divided by 6 is 36, so it would be 17% of my life. 17% of my life to that point in time would have been spent in a prison cell? Are you shitting me? That's not okay. Especially since those are horrific conditions in, like, just the living space is horrific, and then the people you're dealing with could be potentially dangerous. Like, this is not okay. And then, yeah, thankfully, he was, well, not thankfully, but thankfully it was shown that he was framed and it got acquitted and all that fun stuff, so he can vote, carry firearms, and participate in the American dream. But for many people, that's not the case. Even if they are wrongfully convicted, they don't have the means, the resources to get it overturned. So they serve their time, and then they get out with a felony, and now they can't vote. Now they can't do X, Y, and Z. Which is, of course, as I think Princess Kayla said, it's all by design. As soon as slavery ended, America figured out ways to keep black people down in new and more imaginative, toxic, horrific ways. And one of those ways was indentured servitude through prison labor. And then, once you have a felony, making it impossible for you to vote. So, that's... no part of that is okay, and the fact that that's Kamala's record, I hope the Trump campaign brings that up and buries her with it. Lesser of two evils, I don't think she's the lesser. And the worst part of all of this is I think Trump has been the lesser evil. Not that he should be in office. He shouldn't. But he's been the lesser evil when compared to Biden and now to Kamala Harris. Like, that's disgusting in of itself.
She's facing increased scrutiny over her record as a prosecutor in California. In 2004, Harris became district attorney of San Francisco. She held the post until 2011, whereupon she became the Attorney General of California. We're joined now by Lara Bazelon, a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. In January, she wrote a widely read article in the New York Times titled, "Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor." Bazelon wrote, quote, "Time after time, when progressives urged her to embrace criminal justice reforms as a district attorney and then the state's attorney general, Ms. Harris opposed them or stayed silent. Most troubling, Ms. Harris fought tooth and nail to uphold wrongful convictions that had been secured through official misconduct that included evidence tampering, false testimony, and the suppression of crucial information by prosecutors."
Lara Bazelon joins us now from San Francisco. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, but did RFK Jr. have a lot of support to begin with?
Professor Bazelon, can you start off by going through Senator Harris's record, starting with her being DA of San Francisco?
Sure. So she was elected in 2004, and she took a pretty courageous stance initially in that she didn't seek the death penalty against a man who had been accused of murdering a police officer.
That's the fucking bar? She was very progressive. She didn't seek the death penalty against a cop killer. What? She showed restraint by not murdering someone. That's the bar? Between Kamala and Biden, they have destroyed thousands, if not millions, of black and brown lives. Between their influence in the justice system and their immigration policies, never mind their foreign policy.
And she did get a lot of blowback.
Never mind the fact that Biden was voting and writing legislation shoulder to shoulder with Ronald Reagan, which contributed to what we see today with both our criminal justice system and our economy.
From that. Subsequently, she moved much more towards the center in many of her positions, and two things happened in her tenure as DA that I think are worth mentioning. One is that there was a big crime lab scandal whereby there was a lab technician who was using the drugs rather than testing them, and as a result, many convictions became tainted, and it turned out that her office had known for months, top attorneys had, and had not disclosed that information to the defense. And when a judge found out, she became quite incensed and wrote an opinion castigating Harris for allowing this to happen. Harris's reaction to that was to try to get the judge disqualified by saying that she had a conflict of interest because her husband was a defense lawyer. That failed, and 600 cases were thrown out. The second piece...
Jesus. Kamala Harris went full-on tyrant as Attorney General when she was challenged by a judge for essentially corruption and tried to get the judge thrown out, failed, and then had 600 cases thrown out. That's insane.
Piece of her tenure that I think is important that not a lot of people know about is a case involving a man named Jamal Truelove. That case was tried by Linda Allen, who was one of Harris's deputies. And the case against Truelove turned on one eyewitness. It was a one eyewitness identification case.
And that was
he was
the video we
convicted
just
and sentenced to 50 years to life. And the Court of Appeals threw out that conviction, castigating what Allen had done as gross and egregious prosecutorial misconduct. They said that her closing argument was a yarn made out of whole cloth. Recently, Truelove sued the city of California, the city of San Francisco, and won a $13.1 million judgment.
Now, you've also written about another case, George Gage. Could you talk about that as well?
Yes, and this is what prompted me really to write this piece. It's Harris's record on wrongful convictions. So after Truelove, there was Gage, and there was Johnny Baca, and Daniel Larson, and a man named Jose Luis Diaz. And in these cases, what happened was that Harris was at that point the AG, the top official in the state of California, the top prosecutor. And when these convictions came up, they had been handled by lower DAs, and it was her job to decide whether or not to defend them. In George Gage's case, he had been convicted, again, based on a single witness. It was his stepdaughter, Marion, who accused him of sexually abusing her, and the case turned on Marion's testimony. It turned out after the verdict that the prosecutor had suppressed a lot of material about Marion, including medical records and a note from her own mother saying, "My daughter is a pathological liar who lives her lies." And And rather than acknowledge that this really terrible thing had happened, that this prosecutor had held back information that might have swayed the verdict, what Harris's attorneys went into court and did was say, look, George Gage, who had been forced to act as his own lawyer, didn't raise his claim in exactly the right way. And so for this technical reason, you should affirm that conviction. It went to oral argument, and the judges were very concerned about that position, told the deputy to go back and talk to his supervisors to try to resolve the case, which was a signal to really get rid of it and do the right thing. And instead, Harris's office doubled down, and George Gage is currently 80 years old. He is serving a effective death in prison sentence.
I want to go to an interview.
Wow. Fuck Kamala. I think that, woo! This is, we are starting off strong on this stream. I don't really know that I can, that makes me sick. I guess we're going to have to keep
Kamala
watching.
Harris did last month on Face the Nation with correspondent Ed O'Keefe.
You take your prosecutorial record against the push in your party for criminal justice reform. There's a lot of concern among, especially more liberal and younger parts of the party. You may not be the best person to do that, given that you were implementing those tough on crime initiatives as a prosecutor.
Blue Maga says that we're lying.
Well, here's the thing. When I became a prosecutor and when I was elected district attorney and also attorney general of California, I implemented some of the most significant reforms to date during those years that had been implemented.
Yeah,
like
30%
I said, I
increased
created
conviction
one of the
rates.
first reentry initiatives that became a model. It was designated as a model in the United States for what law enforcement should do.
That explains a lot. No, that does explain a lot. Her whatever reforms resulted in an increase in 30% conviction rate during her tenure, and then the other states used it as an example so that they could prey upon black and brown people and other minority groups or vulnerable demographics. What a sick sociopathic person.
Be, as I call it, smart on crime. I was the first in the nation leading the State Department of Justice in California, which, by the way, is the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, to require my agents to wear body cameras. I created, as Attorney General, the first in the nation implicit bias and procedural justice training for law enforcement, knowing that that had to be addressed, which is the implicit bias that exists in law enforcement and the potentially lethal outcomes that occur from that.
So the concerns are overblown?
The concerns are overblown, yes, no question.
So that is Senator Kamala Harris on Face the Nation, speaking to correspondent Ed O'Keefe. If you could respond to
5
this,
years ago?
Laura Bazelon.
Sure. So you can hear her struggling to come up with a list. And she starts with her Back on Track program that she implemented as DA. This was a program that did help certain very select non-violent offenders re-enter society. It affected a very small group of people. She then talks about body-worn cameras. She was asked by the California state legislature to support a bill to mandate all police officers wearing body-worn cameras, and she declined to do that. With respect to implicit bias training, that is important. What's also important, and I would say more important, is investigating officer-involved shootings. She was called upon by the legislature to do that, and once again, she declined. And then when you go down the list of the issues that we think about when we think about a progressive prosecutor, on every single one of those issues, she was on the wrong side. And in some cases, her opponents ran to her left. So, for example, with marijuana legalization in her run for re-election as Attorney General, her opponent ran to legalize. She was against it. She's since changed her position now that the vast majority of the Democratic Party has moved in that direction. There are other examples as well. Her failure to support legislation that would reduce certain felonies to misdemeanors, going after parents criminally for having truant children. So there's a lengthy list of policy positions where there was the progressive path and there was the center-right path, and she did not take the progressive path.
Her opponent was a
Republican. I want to ask you
and
specifically
ran to the
about
left
this
of her.
whole issue of parents with truant children and her policy of trying to prosecute them. I want to go to Kamala Harris's 2011 inaugural speech as California Attorney General as she touted her truancy policy during her tenure as District Attorney of San Francisco. This is what she said.
We know chronic truancy leads to dropping out, which dramatically increases the odds that a young person will either become a perpetrator or a victim of crime. Folks, it's time to get serious about the problem of chronic truancy in California. Last year alone, we had 600,000 truant students in our elementary schools, which roughly matches the number of inmates in our state prison system.
I saw that.
And is it a coincidence? Of course not.
Team Red should be voting for her. She does their bidding, including leaving reproductive rights vulnerable to complete control by the patriarchy. Also high. Yeah. Considering the Republicans already ran to the left of her once and presumably won, and the Republican Party, in their messaging, because obviously their platform is not, but in their messaging is to the left of Kamala Harris, to the entire Democratic Party. The messaging of the Republican Party, not necessarily Trump, not necessarily J.D. Vance, the party as a whole, which we were watching the other day, where they're enticing Gen Zers to come over to talk about, you know, economic inequality and cost of living increases and so on and so forth. That disingenuous messaging is far to the left of the Democrats currently. So it would not actually be too far out of the realm of possibility that the Republicans, to include specifically Trump and J.D. Vance, would run to the left of her policies and whatever she might stand for, which is clearly a very, very oppressive criminal justice viewpoint of sentence them, make them suffer, and then let's get that free prison labor. Oh, and also let's arrest parents for trying to take their kids to chemo appointments. Like, that's insane.
And as unacceptable as this problem is, I know we can fix it. In San Francisco, we threatened the parents of truants with prosecution, and truancy dropped 32%. So we are putting parents on notice.
That's not a good statement.
If you fail to take responsibility,
we threatened parents of truant kids with prosecution, and truancy fell 32%. That's not a good cause and effect. Hi, do what we say or we will ruin your life. How is that a resolution to the problem? The reason why these kids are truant more than likely has to do with the fact that the parents can't afford childcare services because they're not being paid enough and that they don't live in a good enough place. Like, again, the projects are deliberately designed to be low-income, low-quality, high-crime rate places so that you can find victims or targets or patsies through the damn profiling process. As it violates the 8th Amendment. I'm actually not as familiar with the 8th Amendment. Limits the punishments that can be imposed on those accused or convicted of crimes. Oh, so that's the the excessive bail and cruel and unusual. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. We'll add that too. Strike down truancy laws. That might actually be its own policy. That might not necessarily be under the police. So we'll go ahead and add that. I think going to the left for them has come to a screeching halt. The number one guy wants to fire the generals and put in NASCAR drivers in their place. And the number two guy says give childless women votes to children, and then the parents vote for their children as some sort of consequence for not popping out more kids. Wow. Can you find us a link on that? Because that's the first time hearing he wants to replace generals with NASCAR drivers, but yikes for J.D. Vance.
Responsibility for your kids, we are going to make sure that you face the full force and consequences of the law.
Hey, if you're struggling to raise your children and keep a roof over your head and deal with the flaws of our society, we're just going to make your life that much worse. How does that solve the problem? Hey, it looks like you're already beaten down and bleeding. How about I shoot you in the foot so that you can get up and go to work? How does that fucking work? It doesn't. He said it at a rally. Glad I missed that. Glad we don't watch Trump rallies that often. Unless it's at the RNC convention. Oh. Oh, no. All right. I'll copy that and add it to our list. And then we'll watch that after we're done.
So that was Kamala Harris in 2011. What exactly did she do as DA in prosecuting parents?
So what ended up happening was that, and this actually took effect after she left and became Attorney General, prosecutors then had the power under this law to prosecute parents for a misdemeanor for being essentially responsible for their children missing numerous days of school. The idea being that they would be scared into making sure that their kids actually did attend school, and some parents were in fact prosecuted. And the pushback about this, I think, was on two fronts. One, it disproportionately impacted communities of color and parents of color who were basically more often targeted by this law than people who were white. And two, this idea that removing a parent from the home or subjecting them to criminal prosecution would be a tool to really sort of reknit a family, which I think is very questionable. There are a lot of things going on when there are truant children, including poverty, drug use, different issues with kids, and it's just not clear to many people who work in the juvenile space that the right answer to that is to criminalize the parent's conduct.
And has she responded since? Again, I mean, that was a clip in 2011.
That doesn't make any fucking sense. It makes zero sense. That's exactly the... Oh, it's actually... You're right. That does violate the 8th. That is definitely cruel and unusual punishment. Hey, you're dealing with life and your children are unfortunately suffering because of that. So the solution is to make you a criminal and take away more of your rights. Oh, and we're also going to disproportionately target people of color because we're America and we're racist.
Now that she is running for president and her record is being questioned.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, isn't this 5 years ago? But yeah.
And on a number of these issues.
Well, I mean, that to me has been what's been frustrating, is that I don't find her responses to be responsive to the questions that she's being asked, and I don't feel oftentimes that she's being asked the hard question. So the Face the Nation clip is kind of the perfect example where she's thrown what I think is sort of a softball and then responds by ticking off a couple of accomplishments that when you look at them in the bigger context actually aren't that progressive. And so part of it is that she hasn't been pushed directly to answer for truancy, for George Gage, for Jamal Truelove, for marijuana, for opposing testing in Kevin Cooper's case. I mean, she's not getting those questions, I think, directly and forcefully enough. But then also, disappointingly, I think she hasn't reckoned with it and said, look, I am responsible for those decisions. She has said more broadly, the buck stops with me, I was the head of my office. But she needs to take that next step and acknowledge these specific things that she did and reckon with that record.
I want to go to Senator Kamala Harris speaking to reporters in January as she announced her candidacy for president. Senator Harris was asked about her role in defending the California Department of Corrections efforts to prevent transgender prisoners from getting gender reassignment surgery.
I was, as you are rightly pointing out, the Attorney General of California.
I can't find better videos that are newer because now that she's the presumptive nominee, the media is not going as hard on her. No kidding. No kidding. I hope this video makes a resurgence. I hope Hassan finds it. And I know you can't post links on Hassan's stream, but I hope he finds it and it goes viral again because the 168,000 views that this is getting is short by 3 zeros, I think.
California for 2 terms, and I had a host of clients that I was obligated to defend and represent, and I couldn't fire my clients. And there were, unfortunately, situations that occurred where my clients took positions that were contrary to my beliefs. And
no, they clearly weren't.
It was an office of a lot of people who would do the work on a daily basis. And do I wish that sometimes they would have personally consulted me before they wrote the things that they wrote? Yes, I do. But the bottom line is the buck stops with me, and I take full responsibility for what my office did. But on that issue, I will tell you, I vehemently disagree and, in fact, worked behind the scenes to ensure that the Department of Corrections would allow transitioning inmates to receive the medical attention that they required, they needed, and deserved.
So that was Senator Harris.
Wow.
When she was announcing for president, she was speaking at Howard University. Professor Laura Bazelon, your response?
Well, I think what is important to do is to back up and talk about what the job of a prosecutor is. So many people think that it is about convicting people, and it is not. It's actually about doing justice, and that means that if you see something that is wrong, not just against your core principles, but violates, for example, the Equal Protection Clause or the Due Process Clause, you are required as the top prosecutor in your state to stand up and say, I won't enforce this law. And in fact, that's what she did in Proposition 8. So to say, I had these clients and I had no choice but to take these positions is not correct. So I'll give you this example. Proposition 8 was passed by California voters banning same-sex marriage. When she was basically told that she needed to defend this law, she refused to defend it because it violates the Equal Protection Law, in her opinion, and actually...
Here's the thing. Trump is cartoonishly evil, right? He's racist. He's bigoted. He's narcissistic. He doesn't pay his bills. He's a terrible businessman. He's bankrupted casinos, right? He's a fraud, a liar, and a con artist, right? He is a cartoonish evil, right? Not a good person, but it's cartoonish, right? It's the mustache twirling with a top hat. Kamala Harris is actual evil. She used the law as a weapon to harm people who are already downtrodden, beaten, and victimized and vilified already by society. And the fact that this was 5 years ago, and since then, she's been full-throatedly supporting Israel's genocide of Palestine? No, she is 100% the greater evil in this campaign. But wow, they're really doubling down on only parents get a say. Someone said that you don't have to be a parent to be in office, but being a parent gives you a whole new perspective that you won't tolerate kids going to liberal individualism and have boundaries set for them. Yikes. And the kicker of this whole thing is that she boldly stated at the 2020 primaries that Joe hurt her with his policies. Yeah.
The Supreme Court later decided. So she had that option when it came to this transgender surgery. She had that option when it came to the death penalty. When that came up and a judge found that it was unconstitutional, she defended it. And her response has always been, well, these are my clients. But in fact, no, your job is to uphold the Constitution. And if you think these laws violate the Constitution, then you should not defend them.
I wanted to ask you, in your op-ed piece...
Why didn't she endorse Bernie or Marianne in 2020? Because she was running for president herself? And she wanted to become president? So she settled for VP? So she's running for president again now? Yeah.
You say that the term progressive prosecutor has become a trendy subject these days. What do you see as what marks would be some of the hallmarks of a truly progressive prosecutor in America in 2019?
So you're right. It has become this real buzzword, and we just saw last week with this insurgent campaign of Tiffany Caban in Queens. This is someone who's 31, a queer Latina, lifelong public defender, never prosecuted a case, and she ran on a platform of dismantling our system of mass incarceration, decriminalizing certain crimes, not prosecuting certain crimes, ending cash money bail, which is essentially a criminalization of poverty, because it says to people whether you can get out or not doesn't really depend on anything other than your ability to pay, which means a wealthy person can be free and a poor person has to stay and languish in jail while their case goes forward. So progressive prosecutors, they run on those platforms, and they also run, most importantly to me, on a platform of we are going to correct wrongful convictions. And when people are suffering and dying in prison and they are innocent or they are wrongfully convicted because of corrupt official misconduct, we are going to uncover that. We're going to go to court and we are going to do the right thing and undo those convictions. So it's a laundry list of policy positions, and they are brave and they are new in our system because we've had for so many decades people running on who can be the toughest on crime. But a lot of Americans are getting really fed up with that because it's expensive, it's ineffective, and it's unjust and racist. And so
I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, man, there's a lot that needs to be added. End mass incarceration. There's a lot, actually. I'm going to actually have to save this video and watch it again. Actually, it's because it's this one. Record as a prosecutor. Watch 14. Policy. Cool. She did the opposite of all of that. No, yeah, correct.
These new prosecutors are embracing reform, and they are running and they are winning on that platform.
Laura Bazelon, we want to thank you for being with us, professor at University of San Francisco School of Law, director of the school's Criminal and Juvenile Justice and Racial Justice Law Clinics. We'll link to your piece in the New York Times.
Wow. So, the truancy law. That's the last bit of bashing on Kamala today because, wow, she is an evil person.
Democratic Senator Kamala Harris is starting her 2020 bid trying to act like she is a champion of progressive values and progressive policy. But there have been some old videos surfacing that don't make her look very good. Now, this one I'm sharing here is Kamala Harris giving a speech at the Commonwealth Club in 2010, and she's talking about her policy idea to jail the parents of truant children.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done.
Wow.
This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it.
Right, exactly.
And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school.
Yeah.
So, to that end,
let's hold a gun. Let's hold a gun to parents' heads and say, if you do not comply, you will suffer. Let's rule through fear and threat of violence. Progressive. Yeah, we can't. I can't watch that. She did laugh about it. That title. Absolutely. And this only got 27,000 views. Oh my god. Why aren't these videos making the rounds? Like, okay. Kamala Harris AG record. Are these not showing up? Are they just not showing up? They're not. No, because now it's all VP Harris. All this. AG record. So you would actually, oh my god, that's how insidious this shit is. Seriously, YouTube? Unless I put that into parentheses, all I'm going to see is that she's running for president now. Wow. Wow. That's, it's strange because if you switch the issue to reproductive rights, she would say, hold up, don't do that. Those vids are also from 4 years ago. Yep. I guess Google is your second best option to find it. I'm beginning to doubt that, though, because YouTube is an arm of Google. And if I have to put it in parentheses, then that means you probably have to as well. But I'll go ahead. Kamala Harris AG record. It's the same thing. No parentheses. 2 days ago, 1 hour ago, 21 hours ago, a day ago, 22. Kamala Harris's record on criminal justice. What to know? The Marshall Project. Oh, the Biden-Harris administration. But it doesn't talk about hers. Her missteps on immigration can be used against her. has billed herself as a progressive prosecutor, but her record is complicated. That's about as much. This is about as to the left as it. That's the only ounce there. Before joining the U.S. Senate in 2017, Harris spent years as a prosecutor in California, as a reformer, progressive, or as tough on crime, in large part because those definitions have changed substantially. According to Jamila King, writing for Mother Jones, Harris has long tried to bridge the tricky divide between social progressivism and the work required as a prosecutor, sometimes more successfully than others. As San Francisco District Attorney, Harris vowed not to seek the death penalty, but as a California Attorney General, her office argued it should stand. So this isn't even... This doesn't even condemn her record. This is the kid's gloves. So no, Google is not the second best, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I was not trying to prove you wrong. I was hoping you were correct. So, manipulating media.
Democratic Senator Kamala
Harris. That's a thing. That's a thing. That is 100% a thing, folks. This could be a good video for later. Might watch that during Age of Empires. Let's... Not that this is better, per se, or less scary. Let's talk about the Bangladeshi protests.
The protest and street violence may have ended for now, but police in Bangladesh are arresting more student protesters and opposition members. On Monday, student leaders made some...
I just figured if there's no video, there might be an article somewhere. You would think that, but unless you put the quotes, you're not going to find them.
New demands.
Ensure security on all campuses and release all our students. I came here taking a great risk and I'm afraid. There are members of intelligence agencies everywhere following us. Once the media leaves, perhaps I could be even missing. A civilized and independent nation cannot run like this.
Yeah, correct. Because, again, when students protest in America, police come out in full force as well, threaten, harass, assault, and arrest citizens. That's not how a free and democratic country acts.
State Department, the United Nations, the European Union, and several international rights bodies have condemned the recent violence and called for an investigation. The initial protests were against a government job quota system, but after the crackdown that followed, killed nearly 200 people and injured thousands more. Many are now demanding accountability. The capital city, Dhaka, remains calm but tense after days of student protest and clash with heavy presence of security forces. Stories of personal tragedies are also slowly starting to emerge.
A detective team picked me up, blindfolded me, and then later took me to a room in a building and interrogated me about the student protests and their strategies.
Seriously? Let's treat students as terrorists and then interrogate them as you would a terrorist. Like, are you shitting me? And granted, this isn't America, but this is happening in America. This literally happened during the Black Lives Matter marches, protests that occurred during the George Floyd murder. They were doing that to those protesters as well. And that's when cop cities were beginning to get formed all over the country as a direct result of those George Floyd protests, because if America ever decides to riot, we want to make sure we can beat them down, shoot them, and arrest them, and make sure they never try that again.
They also mentally and physically tortured me until I became senseless.
Last Saturday, 25-year-old college student Mominul Islam, who, according to his family, was not involved in any protest, was caught in the middle and shot in the chest by police in the Mirpur area of Dhaka.
I am a poor person and lost my only son to bullets. I hope no family goes through this.
It's now not enough. Just accept our quota demand. Those who were killed, how they were killed, and why they were killed must be accounted for first, and the government must answer this.
The government blames the opposition and its allies for orchestrating the recent violence. Many government and public properties were burned and damaged, including Metro Rail and Bangladesh State Television Center.
Well, yeah, when you respond to peaceful protest with violence and then incite more fear and violence into those protesters, what do you think is going to happen? Like, that's again why using fear and threat of force does not resolve nor de-escalate anything, but only escalates. And that's what they want. They want to escalate the problem so they can see, look, they're violent. They're not peacefully protesting. If they had issues with our government, they should have done so peacefully. But look at what they're doing. After, we targeted them and started assaulting them and, murdering innocent people in broad daylight.
Today, as per the call of duty, the police force has stood up to protect the life and security of the people, government, and public properties. Instead, what we saw is that the police forces themselves came under brutal attack.
Yeah, oh no! The oppressive forces were under attack, oh no! Then you might get authoritarian U.S. policy of stepping in and destroying a peaceful movement? Exactly. Oops, that was supposed to be a period, not a question mark. Right. Going back to the truancy thing, it still boggles the mind that these are the best people that people think will best represent all of us. They don't think of the consequences of saying something you figure someone else you don't like would say. I mean, what if they're truant because they're treated like trash in their school by teachers who destroy their confidence by hurling insults at them? What if they're truant because they're afraid to go because of a classmate who's a bully? You're exactly right. Truancy might not have anything to do with poverty, but because the kid is just afraid, or the kid itself is ornery and is like, hey, I'm gonna skip school. Why is mommy and daddy in prison? Or because it's black poor communities, why is mommy and daddy dead in our living room with the boiling pot of water still on the stove?
Calling on the government to hold an investigation and provide justice to the families of those who have been killed. Tanvir Chaudhary, Al Jazeera, Dhaka.
Well, the United Nations has demanded an investigation of the Bangladeshi government's crackdown on student protests. Violent clashes that killed at least 150 people were sparked during student demonstrations against quotas on government jobs. So those quotas have since been mostly scrapped. The protest movement is now calling on a number of government ministers to stand down. And earlier, we spoke to the Bangladeshi Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Muhammad Ali Arafat. He said third-party actors should be held responsible for the violence and not the government.
Third-party actors? You're the government that killed the protesters by setting the police and the military upon them. What do you mean? What do you mean? What third party? What if they're truant to prevent themselves from becoming the next Aubrey Wyatt? Yeah, no, there's any number of reasons. Yeah, so the protests worked. Not really, because they're still happening. And the government is not giving in to any of the requests, nor taking any accountability.
We're not talking about the students. We're not referring to the students to be the terrorists and anarchists. It is the third party, those who intruded into this movement and started doing all this. Who do you think indulged into the jailbreak and help 820 prisoners to escape? Who do you think is invading into the jail and then loot the firearms?
Please tell us
who do you think into the students?
Down. And earlier, we spoke to the Bangladeshi Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Muhammad Ali Arafat. He said third-party actors should be held responsible for the violence and not the government.
We're not talking...
Where did he say that? The quotas... Oh.
Those quotas have since been mostly scrapped. The protest movement is now calling on a number of government ministers to stand down. And earlier, we spoke to the Bangladeshi Minister
for state security. And you must agree that something very seriously went wrong here.
No, hold on. Of course, we as a government, of course it is our responsibility to bring back the peace. And we did everything that we need to do to bring back the peace. We have to do it because it's our responsibility to protect the lives of the people. Therefore, we tried our best to diffuse the tension as much as possible.
Literally, this is what Texas governor said. Yeah, we sent the police and the National Guard to those student protests on college campuses to defuse the situation. What? Literally, I'm not making this up. I really wish I was. Texas governor claims that using the military was to defuse the student protests. Reuters is saying that's false. That's not true, though, because there were literally pictures of the National Guard next to police officers in front of the student protests. What? But that's... where was... Greg Abbott speaks out. There it is. Ivy League universities are showing that their time has passed. They're a little more than monuments ever passed. Now they are accomplices of the chaos they helped to sow. Sure, that's one of his quotes. As a red line, and that anti-Zionism means fighting against settler colonialism, imperialism. Okay, that's not that. Houston DSA stands in unflinching solidarity with the cause of Palestine. Okay, that's still not him. Pro-Palestinian article, which is great. I'm glad they're out there, but this isn't what he said. So this will never happen. The only thing that will happen is that the university and the state will use all law enforcement tools to quickly terminate illegal protests taking place on campus that clearly violate the laws of the state of Texas and policies of the university. Your right to protest the government by whatever means you see fit, because it's not, you know, as long as it's peaceful, is superseded by me not wanting you to do that. And again, don't take my word for it. We'll just quickly post this here. This is CBS Austin. So, actual news. This will never happen. The only thing that will happen is that and there it was. He posted that on Twitter. So, and this will never happen. That the demonstrators are demanding the University of Texas divest from weapons, selling arms to Israel Defense Forces, and the University of resigns. And he's like, nope, we are going to continue investing, and we're going to continue sending arms to Israel, and that the president of the University of Texas is not going to resign. That's literally the same thing. Oh, we're doing everything we can to prevent, you know. Yeah. 150 dead protesters and counting. You can speak up, but if you do, you just might be staring right at a firearm pointed right at your face. Those idiots in Texas are going to go on to the 4th of July in 2025 to celebrate checks notes, protests, and people getting arrested for the protests.
We tried our best to de-escalate the tension so that we can quickly bring back the peace. But because of the, you know, some people who are trying to add fuel to the fire are trying to create a situation where they can, you know, take advantage of it and topple the government, and they went to that extent, we believe, and it is getting more obvious now.
So, Mr. Arafat,
therefore, it made it difficult for us.
Mr. Arafat, we agree then that it is the government's ultimate responsibility to maintain state security. That clearly has in many ways crumbled over the past couple of weeks. Who bears the responsibility? Surely the buck stops with the...
There's just one more thing to clear up. Bangladeshi politicians speaking in this video. Let's just see who you really are. Why? It's Old Man America. Yeah. So the Bangladeshi government is no different than any of the United States governors and presidential responses to protest and civil unrest. Let's just use as much violence and threat of force and fear as we possibly can. Outstanding. I don't think these are for today's stream. Oh, okay. Well, there's some interesting videos there, but probably not what we're needing right now. So yeah, what's happening in Bangladesh already happened in America with fewer fatalities, and it only looks like it's going to get worse if these protests spin up again during the start of the fall semester. Now, we're going to get body cam footage of during the assassination attempt.
So we don't
We're going to see what this is all about.
So this is the guy
yes, that they sent yes, Beaver County sniper seen and sent the pictures out. This is him.
Okay. All right.
Rifle's right there, obviously.
Got it. So the bike in the back.
Oh, so they're just casually talking over a corpse?
We don't know. So
I don't know.
Hi, Heather Wyatt, the mother of Aubrey Wyatt, had her social media ban lifted. Well, that's good to know.
Treating that as suspicious device.
Oh, 1 second. I believe the sniper that seen these and sent the pictures is right inside this building. There. All right. So if you go to that window that's open and yell for, that's the sniper that sent the original pictures and seen him come from the bike and set the book back down and then lost sight of him.
Okay.
He's the one that sent the pictures out. I don't know if you got the same ones I did.
I think I did. Yeah. He's like got his glasses on and he's.
You shitting me?
So
just casually talking near a corpse.
Okay. And then this is his bike with the stuff. And our sniper seen him walking away from that, I believe.
Okay.
But he would be right inside that window. He's the one that physically seen this, sent the pictures, and called it out.
Okay. So, and we have.
I don't know what Blue Sky is.
That I don't know.
Detained on this side. Our guy that was just up here told me that there's a guy detained who's the owner of the bike, and I said, no, that's the owner of the bike. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, very disturbing and graphic. It's definitely not sloped, right? Unsecured water tower as well. Immediate, but this is almost an hour after the shots. There was another video taken by the same agent earlier on. When the agents on the earlier video went up, you could see the agent in suit was already there with a few other people. The body on the roof was in shorts. The crooks was wearing long pants in other videos. Wow. That's pretty fucking disturbing. So we're not going to continue watching that. So, yes, we just have soulless ghouls in our government, running for office, enforcing laws. Let's go ahead and see what this link was that you shared in chat. Aubrey Wyatt.
Are very nasty, they talk about you, anything that's negative. There are a few misconceptions about bullying. Everyone thinks it's a rite of passage. It is not. Not every kid is bullied, and not every kid is a bully. There are a lot of reasons why kids bully, and there's no one reason. Sometimes they're having problems at home. Sometimes they want to be popular. Sometimes they just do it because they have nothing else to do, or they want to feel like a big shot or whatever. When bullying gets too far, it all depends. Is it emotional? Is it verbal? Is it cyber? Is it threats? Racial bullying. That's really even worse. Verbal and emotional bullying is the biggest. The cyberbullying is a little more difficult because it's 24/7. It's someone hiding behind a screen. It's very tough for kids not to answer a cyberbullying threat or comment, but they're much better off not to do it. There are kids out there who will go say to other kids, go kill yourself.
Or is this just a PSA? Okay, that's not the mother. This is the mother. A judge reinstated her account during a legal battle. Yeah. You fought for us, you fought for our rights, you fought for what needed to happen, and you wanted to right a wrong. Okay. After her death in September 2023, Wyatt began posting on TikTok to express her grief and to raise awareness about bullying and mental health. In the post, she claimed her daughter had been a victim of severe cyberbullying by peers at Ocean Springs Middle School. The post amassed millions of views. However, in June, the parents of 4 teenage girls accused of bullying Aubrey filed a lawsuit against Wyatt, accusing her of slander, defamation, and negligence. They denied that their children bullied Aubrey and claimed they faced online harassment as a result of her post. Gee, how the turntables. The complaint noted that the initial investigation into the death by local authorities found the bullying allegations to be unsubstantiated. Although Wyatt did not directly name or threaten the four girls, their identities and personal information were shared online by other users who had viewed her posts. One girl's home address was even posted online. After being sued, Wyatt started a GoFundMe campaign to help cover the expenses, which raised the money. The parents dropped the suit, and then in the TikTok post, she said thanks. Yeah, what a world we live in. My darling girl didn't murder your child through excessive cyberbullying. She would never do that. Aubrey Wyatt was a 13-year-old girl who unalived herself due to being bullied. Yep. I think there was a case on cyberbullying where someone did something because of the people on social media or something telling them to do it. So someone got charged for responsibility in it. Yep. The bully's parents dropped the lawsuit against the victim's mom, which goes to show they were, in fact, in the wrong. Now, do I think that those four teenage girls need to be prosecuted for murder or accessory to murder or anything like that? No. Why? Because they're children. The problem is that society enables these children. Society is at fault. Those children are going to have to live with the guilt and knowledge that they drove somebody to unalive themselves. To unplug from the matrix, if you will. And I don't think we need to complicate that with more criminal impact. Of course, Kamala Harris, she would make sure that they get the death penalty. The problem is the parents and what's happening within their own households. Exactly. The parents, if anybody's going to be charged or prosecuted with anything, it would be the parents for encouraging, condoning, allowing, whatever. Whatever role they had in it, that's what they should be held accountable for. But the kids are victims in that sense. Can you imagine your kid is such a monster and you still go out and sue the victim's mom? No wonder the children are bullies. Well, guess where they got that information from? How to become a monster? From mommy and daddy who just sued the mother of the victim. So, yeah. Michelle Carter, that does ring a bell. Conrad Roy case. That one, not so much, but I think I heard of Michelle Carter. Something Samuel Sharp. I think this was the victim.
I want to turn to another story that you've been reporting on. On Tuesday, police officers from Ohio shot dead 43-year-old Milwaukee resident Samuel Sharp, an unhoused black veteran here in Milwaukee. The officers who killed Samuel Sharp are in Wisconsin here, part of a 4,500 law enforcement officials group.
That's still a form of bullying.
Come to the RNC. The shooting took place a mile from the RNC's proceedings. Sharp appeared to be in the middle of an altercation with another man when the police officers charged towards him before fatally shooting him. This is Alan Chavoya of the Milwaukee Alliance Against Racial and Political Oppression.
We spoke repeatedly with MPD and expressed the concerns of the people of Milwaukee as to what was going to happen with the thousands of police officers and law enforcement agents from around this country that were going to descend on Milwaukee. And they didn't give us a single answer. They told us to trust the process. Well, look at what the process got us. We warned the city. We warned Chief Norman. We warned the representatives, the Chief of Staff, Nick DeCiato. We told them, you're going to bring a whole bunch of outside agitators to our city, and look what they're going to do. And they did it today. We're not even 2 days in to this RNC, and we have a casualty. How is that possible?
So, Robert Henley, you're an award-winning investigative reporter. You're here to cover the RNC, but you end up covering this as well.
It's no surprise. When you militarize your politics, we see the results.
Sorry I'm late. I was at the mechanic and my phone died. All good. Welcome to the stream. We've been covering a lot about Kamala Harris being actually a evil human being, and how the Democratic convention nomination process is actually cost prohibitive and exclusionary due to the delegate process not being able to nominate multiple candidates, which means being a dark horse candidate is not an option. It's also financially not an option. And then we were looking at the Bangladeshi student protests and how the antics of the government of Bangladesh is the same stuff that basically governors do in America every time they go after protesters. It's been a pretty heavy stream, actually, all things considered. And now we're talking about the homeless veteran who got murdered by an Ohio cop at the RNC convention.
So look what happened in the field in Butler, Pennsylvania. $1 trillion national security apparatus that can protect the former president of the United States from a sole actor. Do we feel safe now?
So you have here the killing of a unhoused black vet.
Which follows on the killing by private security guards of a black individual who walked into the wrong gender restroom.
That's right. That was Devonte Mitchell, and we'll talk more about his case, killed not far from where we're broadcasting right now by security guards.
So I'm kind of glad there isn't more to this video, because if there had been body cam footage, I think that would have been a bit much. But yeah, the Ohio cop sees two black men arguing and immediately races after them, gun drawn, ready to fire, and does. And did that cop get fired? Cop who killed Samuel Sharp fired? Well, that's good. He's charged with murder for murdering Sonia Massey. That's good, at least. Of course, history of alcohol abuse. Shocking. Sunrise Police relieves sergeant of duty after he grabbed an officer by the throat. They even do it to themselves, apparently. Wow. All we're seeing is body cam. And again, we're not going to watch that because we're not going to watch somebody get murdered on stream. So why the hell is there nothing about this cop being charged? I don't think the one who killed Samuel Sharp has been charged yet. If he even gets charged. Because Ohio cops are some kind of something, let me tell you. That is everything that we had prepared today. I don't know... Oh, yeah. Let's
I'd like
break
to bring
this
in
down some
Nura
more, right?
Erekat. Nura, if you could also respond to Netanyahu's speech and what was most striking to you. I mean, the number of times the audience broke into this enthusiastic applause.
Yeah. Remember when I translated his entire speech into German? And it was literally no different than a Nazi rally? Like, because I don't... Okay, so here's the thing. Right? I'm proud of my German heritage, right? Germany is a wonderful country. I love my brats and my my beer and my brezen. I love the bees in Germany, right? All sorts of great stuff. They got high-speed rail. They got mass transit. They got clean energy. The whole 9 yards, right? But they also have a dark history that they acknowledge. They were Nazis and they committed the Holocaust, and it was awful. But we in America love to compare people that we don't like to Nazis outright. And it's almost lost its meaning, its oomph, right? Like, if I was on this stream saying fuck every 5 seconds, and then I say fuck again, for emphasis, it loses its entire gravitas, right? It loses its entire punch, because I'm swearing so much on stream. To swear at all then kind of seems obvious, right? So when people say, oh, this person or that person's a Nazi, are they committing genocide? Are they persecuting a minority group? Are they rousing the public opinion against them? And is their rhetoric dangerous enough that it could actually lead to violence? And if the answer is yes, then yes, you can compare them to Nazis. But the thing is, people don't get that nuance. All they think is, you know, the Heil Hitler, the funny mustache, and speaking German. So it's like, okay, fine. Let's translate this speech into German, and I will say it with force. And then tell me if it sounded like a Nazi rally speech. Because if it did, I promise you, it would have been held in a Nazi rally speech. Except instead of the Palestinians, it would have been the Juden, and instead of Netanyahu, it would have been Hitler. So I did that for emphasis. I did that to put it into perspective that what is happening in America, what that speech was, is Nazism. 110% unmitigated, unadulterated Nazism. And that should be deeply, deeply concerning to everyone. And if you're fully standing ovation, applauding, supporting it, guess what? That makes you a Nazi sympathizer.
And they know if you're a safe driver, you can save up to 40% with Allstate. Now that's nice.
Exactly. I hate the word Nazi is being thrown around. Right. And I do too. Especially when it's like, oh, that person's being a Nazi. It's like they're literally disagreeing with you over pineapple being on pizza. That's not Nazi rhetoric. Disparaging an entire people and calling for their extinction and extermination, though, that is Nazi rhetoric.
I think that that was probably the most disturbing, because for those of us who have followed this for 292 days now, we have understood the blatant lies that Israel has said, that all of its apologists have made. But to watch U.S. Congress jubilantly cheer on, scramble over one another in order to cheer for essentially what is a war on children. When Netanyahu says they want to finish the job is annihilation. It is extermination. It is genocide. They have flattened all of Gaza. It is reported that it will take 10 to 15 years just to clean up the rubble. There are no hospitals. Children cannot be treated. There is now a spread of polio. And U.S. Congress is applauding for this jubilantly, at one point breaking out into a chant of USA, USA. And so as I watch that, one of the things that occurs to me is how the debate within the United States approaching the election in November has taken on the stance that there is a demarcation or a distinction between foreign policy and domestic policy, what happens over there and what happens at home, as if those things are not entwined and imbricated. Right now, those chants at home echo an entitlement to kill, echo an entitlement to plunder, to destroy lives that are not seen or deemed worthy, and where racism and colonialism is not a dog whistle, but is on full display. So for those who are concerned...
The fact that this only got 54,000 views is depressing. Holy bleep. Vance did admit that he indeed was saying parents get more of a say than non-parents in voting and everything. Because non-parents have no stake in this country, no contribution to the future of the country, even though they rule on birth control on them and childless people go to the doctor. And he said he knows the Post and stuff will pick up on this as if they're bad for reporting on it. Yeah. Basically, we have fascism in red, fascism in blue running for office right now. And it really makes me concerned for the future of this country. Deeply concerned, because whether Trump or Kamala's in office, the next president who tries to be on the left might not get the chance to even be heard like Bernie Sanders. They might outright be silenced. The West Bank is next, yeah. And then on to Syria and all of the rest of the Middle East, apparently. I'm going to let this play.
Concerned about saving their democracy at home, I want to tell them that there is no democracy to save that manifests itself in ongoing genocide in this way. Consider that your fellow Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, American Muslims have been subject to a fascist regime at home already, not only in being forced to watch a genocide for which we are punished for naming, but also to have anti-terrorism act being leveled against those of us who are protesting U.S. policy, who are entreating the United States to follow its own law, the National Security Memorandum number 20, the Arms Export Control Act, the Leahy Amendment, insisting that the U.S. cannot continue even at the bare minimum to transfer arms to a belligerent state that is violating U.S. and international law. Palestinian, Arab American, American Muslims have been attacked, have been stabbed, have been run over. And yet you are telling us that we have to save a democracy at home. We are not living in a democracy, and the worst is yet to come. And for those who are watching helplessly because they think Congress is beyond reach and out of hand, this is local as well. This extends down to your community and your university, where university administrators have called on cops in order to punish students who are excellent students, who, contrary to what Netanyahu, a foreign agent, is telling the United States, don't know what the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea is, have studied it meticulously because of Palestine studies in the United States and the Centers for Middle East Studies, who understand ethnic studies, who understand global politics, who understand international law. Because they are meticulous students and who are acting upon their agency, they too are being punished by university administrators. This is a problem from the top to the root. If you want to save a democracy, you must enforce a ceasefire now. You must end a U.S. transfer of weapons now.
Professor Erekat, I wanted to go to Netanyahu's speech where he praises President Biden for providing military support for Israel after October 7th.
I thank President Biden for his heartfelt support for Israel after the savage attack on October 7th. He rightly called Hamas sheer evil. He dispatched 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East to deter a wider war. And he came to Israel to stand with us during our darkest hour, a visit that will never be forgotten. President Biden and I have known each other for over 40 years. I want to thank him for half a century of friendship to Israel and for being, as he says, a proud Zionist. Actually, he says a proud Irish-American Zionist.
And this is the Israeli.
When, not if, these clowns finally get held accountable for their genocide, for their hate-mongering, for their fear-mongering, I think the world will finally know peace. Because the only way we will know peace is if those kinds of people are removed from power and held criminally accountable for their actions. That's disturbing. Knowing that Zionism is basically a euphemism for Nazism at this point, that they're advocating for the genocide of Palestinians, and that this has been going on for 70 years. So over half the time that Biden and Netanyahu have known each other, this illegal occupation has been in effect. I can't watch this. This is just going to make me extremely angry. Kamala Harris on Palestinian protesters. This is good because also infuriating and disgusting. Her response about this. Kamala Harris sympathizes with anti-Israeli protesters, but then immediately turns around and then Now, of course, I can't find it. Kamala Harris remarks about protesters burning flag. How about that? Okay, so here it is. I condemn any individuals associating with the brutal terrorist organization Hamas. Thank you for the follow. Which has vowed to annihilate the state of Israel and kill Jews. Pro-Hamas graffiti and rhetoric is abhorrent, and we must not tolerate it in our nation. The VP said in the statement issued by her office, I condemn the burning of the American flag. That flag is a symbol of our highest ideals as a nation. It represents the promise of America. It should never be desecrated that way. So that was her statement. I guess it wasn't in a video. I was looking for a video, and there wasn't one. So, right, where was it? Right there. Absolutely disgusting response. Because I'm certain, the flag is being burned, and yeah, there's, puppet of Israeli Prime Minister. Sure, that's certainly violent looking and whatever, scary, but, oh, you're a student from Bangladesh. Well, welcome to the stream. It's got to be pretty damn, well, late or early, actually. It's probably early morning for you, isn't it? We're covering U.S. politics mostly, but we also cover foreign policy when it impacts American policy or is tangential. And with the protests happening in Bangladesh right now, it's very similar to the response American law enforcement and governors gave to those students as well. Right. Goodness. Hair or something. Later in the evening, a group of Republican lawmakers helped raise new American flags outside the Union Station. I support the right to peacefully protest, but let's be clear, anti-Semitism, hate, and violence of any kind have no place in our nation. That she herself perpetuated. As DA, as Attorney General, as a prosecutor, she literally enforced and made worse hate and violence. Also, thank you, Ocean. Also, Palestinians are Semitic people. So it's the fact that they're using this as a dog whistle is also stupid. And then they act like the judge, jury, and executioner of what defines anti-Semitism in action. Yep. Oh. Fun. Super fun. I think we might just want to transition a bit into Age of Empires a little early. Because, this is pretty damn disturbing. Oh, wait.
Same subject. Madam President, tomorrow, Wednesday, will be a unique moment in congressional history. Throughout the many years of our country, leaders from dozens of countries with all kinds of political backgrounds and persuasions have been invited to address a joint session of Congress. To the best of my knowledge, however, tomorrow will be unique in bringing Prime Minister Netanyahu to address a joint meeting of Congress. It will be the first time in American history that a war criminal has been given that honor. Frankly, this invitation to Netanyahu is a disgrace and something that we will look back on with regret. With this invitation, it will be impossible, with a straight face, for the United States to lecture any country on earth about human rights and human dignity. Madam President, as you well know, along with Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar and several others, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been credibly accused of war crimes by the International Criminal Court, the ICC. That court may soon issue arrest warrants for Sinwar and Netanyahu. The case against Sinwar and his Hamas accomplices are clear. They were organizers of the horrific October 7th terrorist attack on Israel that began this war and involved the mass murder of 1,200 innocent men, women, and children, the taking of hostages, and sexual violence. These war crimes are well documented, and very few people would dispute the merits of these charges. The ICC's prosecutors' charges against Netanyahu are also well-founded. The charges focus on the starvation of civilians as a method of war, as well as intentional attacks against the civilian population. Specifically, the prosecutor says that Netanyahu is responsible for, quote, depriving civilians of objects indispensable to their survival, including willfully impeding relief supplies as provided for under the Geneva Conventions, end of quote. A separate UN independent commission of inquiry likewise found that both Hamas and the Israeli military have committed war crimes since October 7th, leading to widespread civilian deaths. The commission said the Israeli military's, quote, intentional use of heavy weapons with large destructive capacity in densely populated areas constitutes an intention.
Well, first of all, I don't want to be bald, all right? So don't you dare threaten that with me, but I can do the... Hold on. Is my hair really not going to fluff out? The one time I actually wanted to muss it up, it doesn't. Yeah, and I'm getting DMs from Blue MAGA saying that I'm spreading misinformation about Kamala Harris, and it's like, no, I'm not. I'm 100% not spreading misinformation about Kamala Harris. If anything, there isn't enough information about Kamala Harris to spread. Like, you have to go back 5 years just to find dirt on the woman. Like the meme you made? Oh, geez.
And direct attack on the civilian population, particularly affecting women and children, end of quote. Madam President, I think we all agree that Israel had the right to defend itself against the horrific Hamas attack on October 7th. But Netanyahu's extreme right-wing government has, since that attack, waged what amounts to a total war against the entire Palestinian people, making life unlivable in Gaza and killing tens of thousands. These actions have trampled on international law, on American law, and on basic human values. Madam President, I understand that the mass media and many of us in Congress have been preoccupied in recent weeks with the awful assassination attempt against former President Trump and the changes at the top of the Democratic presidential ticket. But while all that is going on, it is absolutely irresponsible for us to turn our backs on one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history, especially when that disaster has been aided and abetted by U.S. taxpayer dollars and weapons. In other words, it's not just the Israeli government, it is us and our money and our weaponry as well. Madam President, let us be clear. Let us be very clear as to what is going on in Gaza right now. Since this war began, among a population of 2.2 million people, at least 39,000 Palestinians have been killed and 89,000 injured. 60% of whom are women, children, or elderly people. Most observers believe that the death toll is much higher because thousands of people remain buried under the mountains of rubble. Their bodies have not yet been recovered. Madam President, some 1.9 million people out of a population of 2.2 million have been driven from their homes. 90% of the population. Take a deep breath. 90% of the population driven from their homes. The vast majority of these desperate and poor people have now been displaced not once, not twice, but in some cases 4 or 5 times, herded around like cattle. Just yesterday, Israel announced another evacuation order for Khan Yunis, and 150,000 people were forced to flee on a moment's notice. Just yesterday. Madam President, when we talk about housing in Gaza, it's not just that people have been displaced time and time again. More than 60% of Gaza's housing has been damaged or destroyed, including 221,000 housing units that have been completely destroyed. Where are these people going to go to if and when this war ever ends? And with that housing destruction, more than 1 million people remain permanently homeless. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out. Today, more than 1 million Palestinians, almost half of the population of Gaza, are living in tents, trying to find shelter, trying to find protection from the intense summer heat in that area. But, Madam President, it is not just the housing that has been destroyed. Gaza's civilian infrastructure has also been devastated. Water and sewage systems have been made inoperable, and the result, raw sewage is running through the streets of Gaza, spreading disease, and there is very little clean water. Many roads are impassable, and there is virtually no electricity now in Gaza.
I mean,
but it's not just.
I know we're supposed to be saying literally anything during this, for I guess copyright reasons. I guess, but what is there to add? What else? What is there else to say to this? Just wow. Something chicken wings lawsuit, Ohio Supreme Court. Someone got a bone stuck, and they say boneless wings can still have bones. Chicken wings advertised as boneless can have bones. Okay, yeah. We might get into that, but let's finish listening to Grandpa here.
That's been destroyed. Not just the infrastructure that has been destroyed. Madam President, Gaza had 12 universities, schools of higher learning. Every single one of those universities has been bombed. And 88% of all school buildings have been damaged. In other words, under Mr. Netanyahu's leadership, the entire educational system in Gaza has been annihilated. In fact, 540 people have been killed while sheltering in UN schools. But, Madam President, it's not just the housing that's been destroyed, not just the infrastructure of Gaza that has been destroyed, not just the educational system which has been destroyed. At a time when almost 90,000 people are dealing with war-related injuries in Gaza, including many, many children have lost their arms and their legs, who are suffering all kinds of diseases. The healthcare system in Gaza has been systematically obliterated. 21 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are completely out of service, and the remainder can only partially function. The World Health Organization has recorded more than 1,000 attacks on healthcare facilities since October 7th. As a result, disease is spreading due to shortages of clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. Cases of hepatitis, dysentery, and other infections are on the rise, and cases of polio have now been detected. Malnourished women struggle to breastfeed their newborns. Formula is inaccessible, and even when available, cannot be used without reliable sources of clean water. So the tiniest children and their mothers suffer as well as a result. But Madam President, it's not just the displacement of 1.9 million people. It's not just the mass destruction of housing. It's not just the obliteration of the infrastructure. It's not just the destruction of the educational system. It's not just the annihilation of the healthcare system in Gaza that we are seeing. It is even worse than that. And I hope that my colleagues who attend Mr. Netanyahu's remarks on Wednesday remember this as they rise time and time again to give him standing ovations.
Oh, he knew that shit was going to happen.
As a result of Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid,
he called that
people
out.
in Gaza are now starving to death. So remember, when people stand up and applaud, children, women, innocent people in Gaza are now starving to death. According to the best available research, drawing on leading experts from the UN and other aid organizations around the world, some 495,000 Palestinians face starvation. These groups estimate that more than 50,000 children require treatment for acute malnutrition and are at risk of starving to death. At least 30 documented, and I suspect it's a lot higher number than that, have already starved to death. So when you stand up and applaud that guy, remember the starving children that he has created. But even those who get the life-saving care they need, the children, will carry the scars of this disaster for the rest of their lives. As every psychologist will tell you, a child's brain develops fastest in the first 2 years of life, and childhood malnutrition does lifelong cognitive and physical damage. That is what Netanyahu is doing to the children of Gaza. And I would ask my colleagues to stop for a moment and also think about the psychological damage this war has done to the children there. Imagine being a child living with the constant buzzing of drones above your head, wondering whether those drones are going to rain fire and bullets onto your home, wondering if they might strike you at any moment. Imagine being a little 5-year-old, witnessing your relatives killed, your neighborhood destroyed. Think about being a 10-year-old, going hungry night after night and searching around for water and for food to survive. Think about being pushed from one place to another, not knowing where you'll be tomorrow, carrying your little belongings, your few belongings through streets, running with sewage amid piles of rubble and trash. That is what Mr. Netanyahu, the man Congress is honoring tomorrow, has done to the children of Gaza. According to the UN and virtually every humanitarian organization functioning in Gaza, Israel has intentionally blocked humanitarian aid, including food, water, and medical supplies, from reaching the desperate people in Gaza. And let us be clear, there is no excuse for this. Blocking humanitarian aid killing aid workers and creating the conditions for starvation. These are not only acts of extreme cruelty, but they are clear violations of both U.S. and international law. They are war crimes. They are war crimes. And Netanyahu heads the government that has enacted these policies. So tomorrow, Madam President, Netanyahu comes before Congress. I hope that for 1 second, the members who attend will focus just for a second on the starving children in Gaza. I hope while they applaud that they will think about the hundreds of aid workers killed, the dozens of hospitals bombed, the housing destroyed, and the universities obliterated. Madam President, when Mr. Netanyahu rises to speak tomorrow, I also hope that my colleagues remember that all this death and destruction is not just the unfortunate byproduct of a brutal war. Revenge and destruction are the explicit policy of Netanyahu's extremist right-wing government. 2 days into the war, 2 days after October 7th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, quote, this is a direct quote, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly." End of quote. And that is exactly how they have pursued this war. They define the Palestinian people as human animals. And tragically, they have acted consistent with that view. Madam President, let us remember and understand that the Israel of today.
So what are we talking about
today?
War crimes, as it turns out.
It is now
how
run
much of an
by
evil human being
right-wing
Kamala Harris.
extremist government. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, the man who oversees the police, has long advocated for the forcible expulsion of Palestinians from the region. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, the man responsible for the occupied West Bank, is also an extreme racist and has called for the expulsion of Palestinians from the land. He has called for segregated hospital wards for Jews and Arabs because, quote, "Arabs are my enemies," end of quote. And that is the man who is in charge of the occupied West Bank. And that is the current Israeli finance minister as well. Madam President, it should come as no surprise
straight up
that this extremist government, in addition to destroying Gaza, has overseen record Israeli settlement in the occupied West Bank in violation of international law and commitments to the United States.
We also talked about a cop from
Israeli
Ohio killing
forces
homeless
and
people.
vigilante settlers have killed more than 500 Palestinians in the West Bank
I don't want to
since
burst
October
your bubble,
7th,
but
including 131 children. Just last week,
concerns,
the International Court of
boneless
Justice
chicken wing
issued a ruling
conspiracy is
on the
pretty
Israeli
well on the,
occupation of the West Bank. A
totem
panel
pole
of
there.
15 accomplished judges from around the world confirmed what most of the world has long known. That occupation is illegal and must end. I know that there are some here in Congress, not many, but some, who have condemned Netanyahu and his extremist government.
Not many, but some. Hey, at least.
But condemning Netanyahu is not enough. We cannot condemn a prime minister who the ICC considers to be a war criminal, while at the same time continuing to provide his government with tens of billions of dollars in military aid. That is hypocrisy at its worst. Just today, Madam President, I'm happy to say that 7 major trade unions here in the United States, including the Association of Flight Attendants, the American Postal Workers Union, the International Union of Painters, the National Education Association, the Service Employees International Union, the United Auto Workers, and the United Electrical Workers, some of the largest unions in America, representing some 6 million workers, sent a letter to President Biden calling on him to immediately halt all military aid to Israel. And they are absolutely right. Netanyahu is a right-wing extremist and a war criminal who has devoted his career to killing the prospects of a two-state solution and lasting peace in the region. He should not be welcomed to the United States Congress. On the contrary,
well, actually, let's let him finish.
His policies in Gaza and the West Bank should be roundly condemned, and his right-wing extremist government should not receive another nickel from U.S. taxpayers. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Honestly, that was perhaps one of the most goated speeches I have ever heard from an American elected official who didn't immediately turn around and then shoot themselves in the foot for, you know, donors or clout or something else. That man has straight up authenticity. He has actual agency over the right side of history. He has integrity. Quite frankly, I don't give a damn how old he is. I don't give a damn how difficult he is to work with. That was presidential. That was leadership. That was holding the line. And there is literally nobody. No, we love Bernie. The thing about Bernie is he might have capitulated to a slight degree or whatever, but Bernie is still the best politician in America right now. Like, in terms of elected officials, he's the best we got. And quite frankly, he's pretty much the only one we got. So yeah, we definitely don't like Biden. Well, the thing about Nina is that she's been very, hasn't she been extremely opportunistic? And okay, Nina Turner. When was the last time Nina Turner was mentioned? 2 years ago. 8 years ago. 2 years ago. 2 years ago. 2. I know all the names get a little convoluted. Manifest destiny to Lebensraum. Oh boy. FBI not convinced bullet struck Trump? Yeah, because apparently it didn't. Delivers unexpected blow to Trump. Yeah, we don't really care. That's out. That whole... Oof. Peter Welsh? Well, we didn't hear him. We only saw Bernie. What about Rashida Tlaib? Is Rashida still on the good guy side?
And we are Swanee County.
As well as Vermont and New Hampshire.
I appreciate what Bernie did for us. I think it's too much to expect him or anyone to be perfect. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Rashida Tlaib. Yeah, no, I think... No, she actually went to Netanyahu's speech and held the sign, right? Okay, so we have two. We have two good candidates, maybe. I don't know what our voting record is. But if the line is standing up against genocide, we only have two candidates. And that's an atrocity in of itself. The fact that there are only two candidates that are willing to stand up to genocide. Two. You get my military up and running.
In fiscal year 2023, 6,925 migrants were caught crossing the border illegally. In a statement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection said that's the most in Swanton sector history, a 550% increase over 2022, when the number sat at 1,065. And so, getting back to the Mountain Mark gas station.
No fee, no fee.
Despite the reluctance of many,
how much to come from Canada?
3.
When you walk from Canada, do they charge you? Yes. How much you pay?
After days of work here,
¿Qué te dice a la frontera?
It's now clear as day to us.
Most of the people, they come from Canada.
That there's much more to know.
This is just general news. Okay, so that, never mind. That's not what I thought that was. Yeah, let's do Project 2025.
Returning now back to the U.S., where the political blueprint for the next Republican president, Project 2025, has drawn criticism not only from the Democrats, but also from Donald Trump himself, calling the 900-page document, quote, seriously extreme. Yet the contributors of the conservative playbook include some of his closest political advisors, as well as organizations with Christian nationalist leanings. Historian Kristen Kobes-Dumais speaks to Michelle Martin about the rise of evangelicalism in politics and the impact it could have on American democracy.
Kristen Kobes-Dumais, thank you so much for talking with us once again.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I want to focus our conversation on Project 2025, but before we get into that, I did just want to get your take on the Republican convention. One of the reasons we called you is that we last spoke with you about your 2020 book, Jesus and John Wayne, and you argued that, in that book, you argued that modern American evangelicalism has kind of replaced the Jesus of the Gospels with an idol of kind of rugged masculinity and Christian nationalism. Did you see that playing out over the course of the convention week?
Absolutely. You know, that really is the vision. It's not a deep theological vision. It's a vision for a Christian America, kind of need to put that in quotes, Christian America, a vision of the country that says this country belongs to some people, but not to all people. It's a vision of America that draws a stark boundary between real Americans, those who are on God's side, who are trying to restore Christian America, and enemies and threats to America, to this vision for Christian America. And that is an ideology that has run through conservative evangelicalism. You can see it also in conservative Catholicism in some places, in the Pentecostal charismatic tradition. That's really been cultivated for half a century now. If you look back to the rise of the Christian right, you can see this, a very us versus them mentality that depicts kind of the Christians ought to have control of this country, and anybody who threatens that control is seen as an enemy. And that's the kind of theology that plays very well to Donald Trump, because he has promised to protect Christianity, right? His words. He has promised to be their ultimate fighting champion and to battle ruthlessly for, presumably their vision, which aligns with his vision, which is an open question. But that's who he has promised to be for them. And that is really a key to understanding Christian support in this country for Donald Trump. They think he will fight for them and he will give power to them.
So tell me about Project 2025. I mean, if people have been following the campaign closely, they may have heard of this. What is it, and why do you think it's so important that we talk about it?
Project 2025 is a lengthy document, around 900 pages, put together by the Heritage Foundation and then signed on to by over 100 conservative organizations, which essentially provides Trump or the next Trump administration with a blueprint for policy proposals and pretty much a conservative political playbook, although more extreme than we've often seen in recent years. But it also brings together a proposal to essentially restructure the federal government. And that's what's key to understanding about Project 2025. It's not just a policy playbook, it's also a tool to completely restructure the government to give more power to the executive. So we've already seen the recent Supreme Court ruling that grants presidential immunity. And here we're seeing a playbook that is essentially going to hand considerable power across the executive branch, across federal agencies, and place that power entirely in the hands of the next president.
Why is this a particular concern of yours as a scholar of religion and theology? I mean, the Heritage Foundation isn't a religious organization. Why is it that you spent so much focus and attention on this?
First, it's worth noting that many of the conservative organizations that have either contributed to or signed on to Project 2025 are distinctly Christian organizations. And you've got Christian colleges like Liberty University and Patrick Henry College, and you do have Dobson's Family Institute signing on to this document. So we have to think in terms of partnerships here. And a key person here, a key figure, is Russell Vogt. Russell Vogt actually is a former Trump administration official in the Office of Management and Budget. And he also was the director of the committee that wrote the Republican Party platform, right? So there's very deep ties in the Trump administration and close connections to Trump. He is also a self-proclaimed Christian nationalist with very close ties to leading Christian nationalist voices in various denominations across this country. And Vogt wrote the chapter on executive power. So here you can see the Christian nationalist agenda is then going to be placed in the hands of an executive with unprecedented power. And this is important because if you look at survey data on Christian nationalism, what you see is that the majority of Americans do not identify as Christian nationalists. The majority of Americans do not want a Christian nation according to this
now
framework.
You put sexy Deadpool in my head,
so
and I may have to get
democracy
this
is not going
goodness.
to get them to their end
I look
goal.
away from 5
but
seconds.
This kind of executive power grab may, in fact, accomplish what they are setting out to do.
It really envisions kind of a top-to-bottom overhaul of the federal government. What are some of the things that it proposes?
First, in terms of government structure, really important here is it proposes essentially redefining thousands, probably tens of thousands of federal workers as political appointees. And so the goal here is to install, some people suggest 20,000, some as many as 50,000 federal workers, civil servants. You essentially fire those who are currently staffing federal agencies and replacing them with Trump loyalists. And in fact, part of Project 2025 is what people have referred to as a kind of conservative LinkedIn. And so there's a recruitment database and online training to train ideologically and in terms of practical skills to staff a new federal government with loyalists to Trump across all agencies. And this includes the Department of Justice. And this is a really key point to understand in terms of the repercussions here. Trump himself has made very plain that he wants to weaponize the Department of Justice and seize control over operations and then use that to seek retribution against his political enemies. Project 2025 gives him the game plan to achieve that goal. And so that's what we have in terms of government restructuring. There's much more on that front. But then in terms of policies, we have things about restricting the anti-abortion pill mifepristone, for example, withdrawing FDA approval for that, reinvoking the Comstock Act, going deep into American history there, which will prohibit the mailing of abortion pills, possibly also, depending how far they take it, to contraceptives, those sorts of things, anti-LGBTQ legislation, anti-DEI proposals to prohibit the very use of language, of words in federal laws and regulations, things like abortion, reproductive health, gender identity, gender equity. These sorts of terms are going to be canceled and not allowed in any federal laws or regulations. So it really is expansive in scope.
In some of these proposals, there really is an explicitly Christian tone or Christian nationalist tone in their mandate for leadership. For example, in plans for the Department of Health and Human Services, it emphasizes maintaining a, quote, biblically based definition of marriage and family. As it states, for the sake of child well-being, programs should affirm that children require and deserve both the love and nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father. Okay, that is a point of view, but we have a very long established principle here of avoiding the establishment of kind of a state religion. How would this pass muster in the courts? I mean, the courts have still upheld these long-held principles that suggest that you cannot advantage one religious view over others. How do they get around that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you pointed to that particular passage, which could have some real implications, obviously, for same-sex marriage, for adoption, even potentially for divorce. And so that's really key. And it's rooting that proposal in what they claim to be biblical marriage, a biblical prescription for what marriage is and is not. And there's another passage that is really important to understand the framework here. The idea that the Constitution guarantees the freedom or liberty to do what one ought to do, not what one wants to do. And that really is foundation of Christian nationalism. Yes, you are free to obey God's laws. And we are going to structure this country around God's laws. And then they redefine, rather than the right and to the pursuit of happiness, they say it's actually the pursuit of blessedness. And you are blessed when you obey these laws. What are those laws? Well, this is where you can look at the whole conservative agenda here. It's going to be anti-abortion. It's going to be anti-LGBTQ. And so these rights do not exist within their framework. And so they are redefining our nation's constitution, reinterpreting it through this lens that the only rights that are guaranteed are those that align with their understanding of God's law.
I think you still identify as a Christian. Would that be accurate?
Yes, I do.
I'm just curious, like, why is this the version of Christianity that is ascendant now when so many other people have a different interpretation of it?
So there are many people who have said, are saying, wait a minute, this does not align with how I understand Jesus' words in the Gospels. This is not align with how I think we are called to be faithful in this world. But when you offer voices of opposition, your chances are you're going to run up against some real opposition. And many conservative organizations are funded by powerful conservative donors. And this is true in higher education, and this is also true in the Christian nonprofit world. There are all kinds of pressures. The Christian media world, Christian music, right? It's very hard to find a Christian recording artist who will publicly call out some of these things, because if they do, their career is done. At least they're not going to get any airtime on Christian radio, right? In terms of Christian publishing, a multi-billion-dollar industry we're talking. And I think people outside of Christian spaces or conservative spaces are not aware of this massive industry. And so much money is changing hands here. And within that industry, there are political orthodoxies that you have to hold to. And if you cross any of those, right, you're not going to get the book contract. You're not going to get the record deal. And so what we have is a kind of, indoctrination may not be too strong of a word, but certainly the cultivation of one particular way to be a Christian and closing off many of these other understandings of what it means to be a Christian in this country and in the world today.
Before I let you go, there is just one thing that I'm sort of I still remain puzzled by, and that is former Vice President Mike Pence. There is no denying that he was a man of deep and sincere faith, okay? So I'm just curious, like, why the treatment of him isn't more resonant
Your computer died.
among other evangelicals. I mean, he's made it clear he was very badly treated. I mean, there are people calling for him to be killed.
I mean, Mike Pence is the perfect example, I think, of how a lot of conservative Christians and a large swath of conservative evangelicals have embraced a Christian nationalist agenda. And within that Christian nationalism, personal piety is not what makes somebody a great leader. Not at all. In fact, that might actually work against the person in terms of their leadership capacity. What they want is a fighter. They want somebody who will fight their battles for them. They want somebody who will take on the left, the feminists, the woke ideology, and who will fight for them, who will protect them, and who will advance their aims. And that is who Trump is, and that's who Trump promised to be for them quite explicitly. Now, back in 2016, it was kind of unproven territory at that time. It wasn't quite clear if conservative Christians would embrace a man like Trump, who so clearly did not live up to any of their moral standards that they claimed to hold so dear. This is the moral majority, after all. These were family values voters, right? And so Mike Pence was maybe a bit of an insurance policy, or it wasn't quite clear that that Trump didn't need Mike Pence because they were after the fighter. And Pence did not stand up and fight when it mattered for Trump, when it mattered to overturn the election, right? And so Pence very much fell out of favor. A lot of conservative Christians I know say, oh, he's a good guy. Those who aren't rolling their eyes at him for being too weak might say he's a good guy, but he's just not what this country needs right now, right? We need a strong man. We need somebody who will do whatever it takes to preserve this nation and to restore their understanding of Christian America.
Is this a moment in time, or is this something that is just has become such a feature of American Christianity that it is going to be a force for some time to come?
It's both. It's a culmination, is what it feels like to me. That this agenda is not new. These aspirations, we can trace back to the Heritage Foundation was founded in the 1970s. And the Christian right has been advancing this kind of mission for generations now. But this is very much a moment, because they are now poised to essentially take control of the country and the very mechanisms of our democracy. And that is what is new here. That is what is different. And so we, in the past, sometimes you had Ronald Reagan winning the White House, and the Christian right is celebrating, and the Heritage Foundation offers him a mandate for leadership. And we've had that in the past. But what we haven't had is this plan and a likelihood of them achieving this goal if they win the White House, of completely restructuring our democracy, completely restructuring our federal government. And it's not clear what is on the other side of that. It's not clear if we will have another election where we can just reverse things, or if that puts us on an entirely new trajectory in this country. And I think that's the real question when we look at Project 2025 and when we look at the November election.
Professor Kristen Kobus-Dumais, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
$10 can help fund powerful ads to reach undecided voters nationwide. $10 can help open field offices in key battleground states, the ones that we need to win in November. $10 can help hire organizers to knock on doors and connect with voters in your community.
Fuck off, Kamala Harris. No thanks.
Breaking right now on Morning News Now, an unprecedented exit less than 4 months before Election Day. President Biden dropping his bid for a second term, writing, quote,
see right there?
well, it has been
right
my intention to seek re-election.
It
I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president.
Yeah, no, we're not listening to Democratic propaganda. The plan to destroy. Do we want to do some, what do you call that? When you, like, hurt yourself because you need to, like, learn something or do something? Whatever that is. Do we want to watch this? Because every single one of you, or not every single one, most of you are women and or transgender and will be directly impacted by Project 2025. Self-sabotage. Self-suffering, maybe? Self-flagellation? Do we want to watch this or nah? Because the other thing is, we could just do... If Trump loses the election, we could hear about how he's going to be a sociopath. The oppressed majority. Oh my god. Did you cover the NASCAR thing? Oh my goodness. You're really serious about that. Okay. Oh, wait. No. That. Yeah, NASCAR. Trump wants to replace generals with NASCAR. That's freaking funny.
This is going to blow your mind. Trump's latest idea, NASCAR drivers as military generals. Yeah, you heard that right. Donald Trump, the man who brought us "You're fired," is back with another wild idea. In a rally that had more twists and turns than a Daytona race, Trump suggested replacing America's military generals.
Where is the actual verbiage? Seriously, nobody has pointed that out already? Here it is. Finally. Alright, just because we keep seeing this, isn't this for, oh no, these are for the actual cards. I was going to say, Magic the Gathering Online is an actual scam. Don't waste your money. The algorithm will literally force you to win or to lose to maintain 50% win rate. So if you lose 20 games in a row, you can then turn around and win 20 games in a row. Don't play Magic the Gathering Online.
This is going to blow your mind. Trump's latest idea, NASCAR drivers as military generals. Yeah, you heard that right. Donald Trump, the man who brought us "You're fired." NASCAR drivers is no too far. So get ready for our next military operation.
Seriously? I don't care about your damn shorts video clout chasing. I want to hear it with my own ears. Well, I don't know what to do then. If it's at the rally, we would actually have to listen to the rally in order to get to the point where he says that. So I don't know. It's clearly in Charlotte. Charlotte rally, NASCAR replaces generals. I know I misspelled Charlotte. I couldn't find a video of him saying it, and I didn't watch the whole rally. Yeah, I don't want to watch the rally either. Especially since Charlotte was the last, was another place where Nazis marched in broad daylight. Yeah, I know I misspelled it. Looks like pop culture is coming in clutch. When I was playing the game, was the music too loud? Because I've been purposely turning it down a lot. So I will fix that in a second. There is this. Donald Trump to fire America's mineral... Okay, so yeah, we do have something. Contemplating firing generals. Wow, can we not have so many damn ads? It's contemplated firing military generals, replacing them with the best NASCAR drivers. Trump also paid respect to the top football coaches in the nation. Jesus Christ. That's what we need, to turn the military into high school football coaches teaching government and history. Holy crap. My friend just went viral for his Trump song in Warwick, Rhode Island, calling him out for the Epstein flights. Well, that's good. Let them know about the stream, and then we can go viral with them. We appreciate talent. I say, let me see those guys to guide our military a little bit. When you can win so many races, that's okay, you guide. Same thing with coaches. You take some of the greatest football coaches, you put them in a room, it's not so different. It is very different. Lives are at stake, not a ball. Oh my God. Well, what you could do is just post the stream on his video. Yikes, though. He actually said it. I mean, I didn't doubt that he said it. I'm saying, like, yikes that he went there and meant it. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, since we're looking for some...
Look at this graph.
Some content, we'll just, we'll run this one around.
Our humanitarian focus is on the needs of civilians in Gaza. Many have lost...
Look at this graph. As you can clearly see, the thing that I support causes good to increase over time. Meanwhile, the thing that you support causes good to decrease over time. Therefore, the thing that I support is clearly good, and the thing that you support is clearly bad. Destroyed by the graph. Maybe you've seen people throwing out graphs or metrics of some sort, much as that guy just did, presenting them as unassailable points that prove whatever it is they're advocating for 100% correct. In some cases, such metrics are referred to so often that they come to be taken for granted, as if what they imply is simple, unquestionable fact. But closer analysis can reveal that such metrics aren't always what they seem to be at first glance. For example, if I were to examine this graph right here of good and bad over time, then the first thing that comes to mind when I actually think about it is, well, so how exactly do you measure good and bad? You know, those are kind of subjective, abstract concepts, aren't they? So to do so, you'd first have to define them in some way, and there's definitely not anything resembling an objective way to define good and bad. So then we need to ask, how are good and bad actually defined, and does that definition make any sense? And then, given that good and bad on this graph are being measured in a numerical form, that means that said definitions have to be based on some sort of metrics. So which metrics then? And where does the data for them come from? And will looking into those questions reveal that, at its heart, this is all really just made up bullshit? Well, yeah, obviously this graph is. But a surprising amount of supposedly respectable metrics are really not too much better. In this video, we're going to be analyzing in depth some of those very metrics and the graphs that chart them. Some of them well known, others not quite as much. Some of them merely commonly misused, and others outright intentionally created to mislead. All of this will be explained in as easy of a way to understand as possible, so that you can come out at the end of this video not just having learned about the problems with the specific examples that I go over, but also how to critically analyze other metrics for yourself in the future so that no one can lie to you with statistics. I said the name of the video. Please clap. This video was made possible thanks to my supporters on Patreon and Ko-fi. If you like it and you'd like to see more like it, consider heading over there and supporting me yourself. To start things off with something that many viewers might have already seen before, let's first go over what I think might just be the most popular graphs in the world, those based on the World Bank's International Poverty Line. There's many different variations, with the main differences between them usually just being their aesthetic presentation, how the same data is displayed, or how far back in time they go. But they're all fundamentally based on the same sort of data and the same definition of what constitutes extreme poverty. The most common usage of these graphs is by supporters of so-called free market capitalism, who use them as evidence of the success of their political beliefs. The implication is that the rise in the percentage of people not living in extreme poverty, which the graph depicts, correlates with the spread of capitalism around the world, and so this demonstrates that the already predominant global economic system actually works very well, thus disproving any notion that any fundamental changes to it are needed. Now I suggest that you pause the video here and take a closer look at this image, both the chart.
Alright, what do we got going on? Number of people not in extreme poverty, number of people living in extreme poverty. World population, okay. Sure. What do we got?
And the text surrounding it as well. See if you can spot any problems with it that stick out to you. Then unpause and see if you spotted any of the same issues that I point out. Or don't if you don't want to. This is an inanimate YouTube video, not your dad. The first thing that you should always ask about data like this is a simple question. Is it adjusted for inflation? Meaning changes in prices over time. Prices tend to rise over long periods of time, which in turn lowers the relative value of currency. To give you an example of this, 50 years ago, $10 would buy you around the same amount of stuff that around $64 does today. So any metric that involves money and the passage of time needs to be adjusted for inflation, otherwise it could end up being very misleading. We can read here at the top of the graph that this data is indeed adjusted for inflation, though there are doubts that can be raised about how exactly that was done, which we'll get into soon. Now, the first and most glaringly obvious angle of attack against these graphs is the way that they define extreme poverty in the first place, as having an income of less than $1.9 per day.
Hold up.
Do you think that $1.9 per day is genuinely enough to not be living in extreme poverty in much of the world? Could you live on $1.9 a day? I certainly wouldn't like to. And I would imagine that most of you watching this probably wouldn't like to either. So right off the bat, it's clear that while this is a metric that pertains to be measuring extreme poverty in every single country of the world at the same time, it clearly does not actually do so. That begs the question then. Just how exactly did the World Bank decide that $1.9 per day is an acceptable standard to use to measure global poverty? Well, they themselves explain it like this. In 1990, a group of independent researchers and the World Bank proposed to measure the world's poor using the standards of the poorest countries in the world. They examined national poverty lines from some of the poorest countries in the world and converted the lines to a common currency by using purchasing power parity, PPP, exchange rates. The PPP exchange rates are constructed to ensure that the same quantity of goods and services are priced equivalently across countries. Once converted into a common currency, they found that in 6 of these very poor countries, the value of the national poverty line was about $1 per day per person, and this formed the basis for the first $1 a day international poverty line. The World Bank later updated this poverty line to $1.25 per day, and then again to the $1.9 per day that we see in our graphs here. Since the specific graphs we're looking at were made, it was also updated yet again in 2022 to $2.15 per day. That they keep updating it, even though it's already adjusted for inflation, should maybe make us a bit suspicious of its usefulness. So this global poverty line was created by looking at the poverty lines of a small number of the world's poorest countries, averaging them out, converting them to the US dollar, and then attempting to adjust that for price differences and inflation in every single country in the world, with the baseline being the cost of such goods in the USA. That, on the face of it, is a pretty ridiculous methodology. It's a clear attempt to apply the lowest standard of poverty possible from some of the poorest countries in the world to every single country in the world, while adjusting it all to a list of goods and their prices taken from one of the world's richest countries. The flaws of this can immediately be made very apparent just by taking a look at what the extreme poverty rates of some individual regions of the world, or individual countries, would be both today and historically if we applied this standard to them. Usually this measure is applied on a global scale, where the clear ridiculousness of the kinds of numbers that can result is a lot easier to mask. Luckily, the example that I was using of someone employing this graph to make a pro-liberal capitalist argument earlier includes a follow-up, where, in response to someone making a counter-argument, the same person posted graphs of the World Bank's extreme poverty line, but split up by the different regions of the world. The source of the data for these graphs is this paper by the economist Mikhail Motsos, which includes exactly what we need: charts which not only apply the $1.9 a day poverty line to different places in different benchmark years, but that even acknowledge some of the flaws with the methodology of the World Bank's original measure and attempt to improve upon it. Yet the results still aren't any more impressive. Because according to this measure, today, the extreme poverty rate in the Middle East and North Africa is only 1%. In Western offshoot countries like the USA, Australia, and Canada, it's currently 1% too. Worse than 0% in 1960. You know, when the USA still had racial segregation, and Aboriginal Australians still did not even have a federally guaranteed right to vote. Those countries also only had an extreme poverty rate of 3% back in 1920, when not insignificant portions of their populations were still living in slums. A miracle. The extreme poverty rate in Eastern Europe today is only 2%, down from a historical best performance of 1% in 1990, while in Latin America, it's only 7%. Someone should probably tell them about that. Now, what about individual countries? Well, it's somewhat difficult to compare the $1.9 a day poverty line to actual poverty statistics that are produced by individual countries, as it pertains to measure only extreme poverty rather than just poverty. An interesting sleight of hand, because most countries only measure an official poverty line and not a separate extreme poverty line. That makes it somewhat easier for the World Bank's measure to avoid criticism, because comparisons aren't that easy to come by. But a notable exception to this is Argentina, which does actually measure its extreme poverty rates based on a thorough assessment of local conditions that measure people's ability to access the basics, like adequate food and housing. In 2018, this official extreme poverty rate was 6.7%. Yet if the $1.9 a day poverty line is applied to Argentina in 2018, the result is that it had an extreme poverty rate of 0%. Yep, 0%. Off by a factor of infinity. Not bad. So not even remotely close to the much more rigorous official figure. It's quite clear from these figures alone that the international poverty line is just kind of a load of crap. And I'm hardly the only one who thinks this. There are many economists who've done thorough, deep dissections of it, who've come to similar conclusions, though they're too nice to say it in the harsh terms that I use. One of these economists is the same Mikhail Motsos, whose data was used to create this very graph. He wrote, "Only by coincidence the international poverty line would be consistently representative of a welfare-specific type of absolute poverty in any specific country, or the world as a whole. So, if the World Bank's extreme poverty line actually does somehow manage to accurately reflect the extreme poverty rate anywhere in the world, it would be nothing but a coincidence, because the standard that they chose is arbitrary, the quality of the initial data that they use is highly questionable, and the way in which it's then used to extrapolate figures for different time periods and countries ensures that a lot of the time, it's scarcely any better than just making up numbers. Even calling it an educated guess would be extremely generous." And continuing on one of the points that I made there, the versions of the graph which go back in time, especially back before the 1980s and 90s, tend to be based on very scarce actual data, or even often no data at all, even if we were to ignore the clear joke that it is to say that $1.9 a day is enough for everyone in the world to not be in extreme poverty. To accurately measure the average income of everyone in every country in the world to a remotely acceptable level of accuracy, an abundance of data is needed. This includes reliable figures for the income of each individual, for the prices of goods, and international currency exchange rates. And all of this is needed from every single country in the world for every year represented on the chart. So do you think that we have anything resembling such data, going all the way back to 1820? No, we definitely don't. Not even close. And the aforementioned paper by Motsos acknowledges this limitation. It includes his assessment of the quality of the data that is available for every region in different time periods, ranked from 1, meaning high quality, to 4, meaning basically I had to just make it up. For nearly the entire world, high quality data on these metrics is only available from the 1980s onwards, and the data for almost everywhere in the world for the entire 19th century, all the way up until the 1950s, is of low quality. That is to say, that we don't actually have anything resembling adequate data for the vast majority of the world, for the vast majority of the time period that is depicted on this graph. So most of what it shows comes from absurd extrapolations that could very generously be described as educated guesses, but which are probably more accurately described as just made up. So the World Bank's global poverty line is rigged to create the very graphs that result from it, to show that things are getting better and imply that nothing really needs to fundamentally change, which is exactly how they tend to then be used by the very same people and organizations who love to use them. And there's also other angles of attack against these graphs than just pointing out that they're largely based on just sort of making stuff up and saying, trust me bro. For one, in those that go back far enough, the trend of a rapid rise in the number of people no longer living in extreme poverty begins around 1950. This hardly correlates with the dominance of global capitalism. It's actually right around the time where the Soviet Union began to reach its greatest heights, and where China, the world's most populous country, had just completed a communist revolution. And even the world's richest capitalist countries of the time, such as the USA and the nations of Western Europe, had much more statist, less so-called free market economies back then, a fact that I've explored in depth in one of my videos responding to Johnny Harris. Motsos actually acknowledges this in a part of his paper which is usually ignored, saying that, by the World Bank's metric, Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union experienced the most drastic reduction in extreme poverty in recorded history. This is highly inconvenient for those who use these graphs to argue for the economic status quo of today. For two, this graph also correlates with the period of mass decolonization that occurred after World War II. Over the following decades, dozens upon dozens of countries went from being colonized to being independent, something that, basic logic would dictate, would probably result in a rise in living conditions and incomes there. So even if we were to make the error of taking these graphs at face value, it could hardly be said that the spread of global free market capitalism is the only possible explanation for what they show. And given that such an argument is in the first place little more than pointing out a supposed correlation, one could then just as easily argue in response that the real cause was some other thing, which also happens to correlate with what the graph shows, as I just did. Lastly, given that the international poverty line of $1.9 per day, or $2.15 per day, or what have you, isn't actually based on any real honest attempt to form an objective assessment of the actual cost of fulfilling most people in the world's basic needs, we might want to look at metrics that do actually take such things into account and see how they compare. Economist Peter Edward, for example, calculated that for the average person globally to be able to pay for the food, healthcare, housing, and stuff like that they would need to achieve a life expectancy of 70 years, they would need roughly $7.40 per day, adjusted by the same standards that the World Bank uses. When this standard is used instead, global poverty has indeed fallen since 1981, but by a much less impressive percentage than the 50% to 10% drop that the $1.9 a day metric indicates. Rather, it's 71% to 59%. And if you remove China from this equation, then with this standard, poverty actually hasn't been reduced practically at all in the rest of the world. While China is obviously part of the world, it has a very interventionist economy, in which government-owned companies are highly influential. So given how that contradicts the narrative of many of the people who employ these graphs, it would be very misleading for them to take credit for the reduction in people living on less than $7.4 per day, when most of that happened in China. All of that makes things look a lot less rosy than the World Bank's initial graph does, doesn't it? So one might ask, why would the World Bank do this? What might have motivated them to create, and then so pervasively spread, this clearly bogus global poverty line? I'm leaving this bit for last, so that no one can just lazily accuse me of ad hominem. But they'll do it anyway. It's because the World Bank is hardly some politically neutral institution. Despite the world part of its name, it was created by the Western Bloc in 1944 to serve their own interests, and has duly done so ever since. Since the 1970s and 1980s, one of the pinnacles of said interests has been the spreading of so-called structural adjustments, where predatory loans from the bank to desperate or coerced target nations come with the condition that they fundamentally change the very structure of their economies and their laws that regulate it, to open it up, as the euphemism usually goes. The data on the effects of this has since shown that such structural adjustments very suspiciously result in a substantial redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, and from poor countries to rich countries. Surely, it's all just a coincidence though. So the World Bank thus has a vested interest in spreading this idea that such policies have actually been massively successful, hence their extreme poverty metric and all of the graphs that result from it. In summary, everyone who cites the $1.9 a day international poverty line should parachute into a random country with nothing more than $1.90 a day to spend and put their beliefs into practice. That'd be the best reality TV show ever. Now let's move on to something else. Given that I just talked a bit about how data used for historical economic calculations is sometimes extrapolated to the point that it's just kinda made up in the end, I'll stick to that theme for our next topic.
Just one day before the attempted assassination of President Trump, I gave a speech.
The University of Groningen in the Netherlands administers what is considered to be the global standard for historical GDP measurements, the Madison Project. GDP, by the way, is gross domestic product, a metric that attempts to tally the value of all goods produced and sold in a country in a given year into one neat little number. This can then be compared to other countries. It's the most common means used to measure how wealthy different countries are. It's often depicted as GDP per capita, meaning per person, which is a country's GDP divided by its population. This is generally considered to be a more useful metric because it compensates for the fact that some countries are obviously going to have a higher GDP than others just because they have a higher population. The Madison Project is a collaborative effort of many different economists who have made estimations and extrapolations for what the GDP of many countries of the world was in the past. This sometimes dates back to hundreds or even thousands of years. While today there's quite a lot of fairly reliable data to base GDP calculations off, anything even coming close to its quality is simply non-existent for nearly the entire world before at least the 1950s, and in most cases before the 1980s, and the further back in time you go, the worse it gets. The more wild that the extrapolations from limited data become, until they're practically worthless. They also tend to be calculated in different ways from different types of data for every country, or even in different ways for different time periods in the same country. This can make it ill-advisable to use these figures for comparative purposes without a whole bunch of caveats, as you're not actually comparing the same thing at all in a lot of cases. Yet nonetheless, these figures still tend to get cited without any question as to their accuracy, and they're almost always used for comparative purposes. For example, here's a graph based on Madison Project data and presented here almost entirely uncritically in a mainstream American publication that pertains to measure and compare the share of global GDP of a number of present-day countries over a more than 2,000-year period. Now this graph immediately has some pretty glaring issues, like how can it even be said that present-day countries like Italy, Spain, France, or the United Kingdom existed in any meaningful way in the year 1 AD. But let's give them a pass on that one and just assume that they mean to measure GDP based on everything that went on within the borders of these present-day states back then. So, How was this historical GDP data calculated? Maybe the economists who worked on it managed to find some ancient accounting scrolls, and they had enough data on production and prices over a sufficient period of time, covering a sufficiently wide region, to give them at least something that could be worked with to make some estimates that were at least based on some sort of evidence. Or maybe they just made it up entirely. Well, it's the latter. Angus Maddison, for whom the Madison Project is named, wrote about how he calculated this historical GDP per capita data for China all the way back to the year 1 AD. And after I tell you how he did it, you'll probably find it unbelievable that his work is taken seriously at all by anyone. First, Madison had to choose a number to start with back in the year 1 AD. Was this number based on actual evidence, or anything even remotely related to China in this time period? Nope. He just decided to go with 450 USD at 1990 prices. Why? Because at the time, the World Bank's international poverty line was $1.25 per day, or $456 per year. So he took that number and lowered it to 450 to make it nice and even. So he chose a number based on a very questionable measure for extreme poverty that was created 1,989 years later and said, okay, so this is definitely what their GDP per capita was back in the year 1 AD. And then he just called it a day. Really, I respect the goal. Like, how can someone possibly get away with that? As the economist Ken Deng wrote in his analysis of Madison's work, Madison assumed that the populations of the Chinese Empire, before the era of the Song dynasty, lived at a standard of living that could be proxied by a highly controversial modern metric of 450 international dollars. As for what he did to arrive at the rest of his estimates for the remaining 2,000 years in this graph, Deng recounts that Madison just sort of arbitrarily decided that the Chinese GDP per capita remained nearly exactly the same, stagnant at this made-up number of 450 from the year 1 all the way to the year 1000. He then explains that this completely flies in the face of what many of the most well-regarded historians of China have said about how its economy actually fluctuated quite a bit during this period. The next part really has to be directly quoted in full, because it's something. Madison's speculations for rates of growth are drawn from a restricted range of reading from secondary sources in Chinese history and then transposed into numerical abstractions. They deserve to be quoted in his own words. I assume growth of per capita income under the Song was substantial, i.e., it grew by about a third, but was slower in pace than Europe achieved in the proto-capitalist period 1400 to 1820. I assume that per capita income peaked in the Song when there is good reason to believe Europe had fallen substantially below Chinese levels! Exclamation mark. A temporary setback occurred under the Yuan, but over the long run in the Ming and Qing dynasties, per capita performance was roughly stable. This bold summary, covering centuries of Chinese economic history, could hardly become consensual among experts for a field that is distinguished by the most impressive historiographical tradition for research and debate for any Asian country. In summary, Angus Maddison, for whom the Madison Project is named, quite literally picked a random number to use as a base in the year 1 AD, then just estimated changes in Chinese GDP per capita year on year over a nearly 2,000-year period by just sort of jotting down some notes on the vibes that he got from a couple of Chinese history books, and then he made up numbers based on them. No actual data was used at all. Literally none. Effectively, we're talking about a guy who just made stuff up at random, and the stuff that he made up is taken deadly seriously by a lot of supposed experts. The truth is that to even call this an estimate is insulting to estimates. If your ayahuasca gnome blurted out a random series of numbers at you, it'd be just as rigorous and likely to reflect actual reality as these figures. Deng fittingly concludes his paper with a scathing indictment of the very idea of such historical GDP calculations. Concepts such as GDP per capita do not travel, either through time or across the polities and economies of Eurasia. And he's right. GDP was invented relatively recently and is designed to measure economic activity in modern capitalist economies. It's hardly so simple to apply it to societies from many hundreds or even thousands of years ago that had economies that were really not even remotely overall anything like those in much of the world today, and especially not given the total lack of anything resembling adequate data. And yet, we live in a world where Madison's often very blatantly just plain made-up figures are cited by a whole lot of supposedly serious people, including many historians and academic economists, and then accepted by other supposedly serious people with scarcely even a question asked.
This is going to be a little bit more difficult because I have to manage two fronts at once, and I'm not there yet. So we had a pretty in-depth news day. We covered a lot of ground with the Democrats, Kamala Harris being literally the devil, and the Democrats, you know, rigging their own elections. Shocking. And of course, dealing with just current events and world events in general. We will continue on tomorrow. Tomorrow is Conspiracy Friday, so we get to aliens. And hopefully the world isn't as on fire tomorrow. So, remember, 7 o'clock is our typical stream time. So actually, we should have been done anyway. So, tomorrow we will pick up, and hopefully the world is less on fire. Thank you again for watching. See you tomorrow.